She pressed her hand over her son's mouth, praying he wouldn't cry out. Through the gap between the barrel and the storefront wall, Clara Mayfield watched the town celebration she'd never be part of. The laughter, the dancing, the belonging. She was 23 and invisible, except when people wanted to remind her of her shame. An unmarried mother, a cautionary tale, a woman no decent man would ever choose. But today, a stranger's eyes found her hiding place. Not with disgust, not with pity, with something that terrified her more than judgment ever could. Genuine concern. And in that moment, everything changed. Before we begin Clara's journey, hit that like button and comment which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's step into Red Hollow, 1882. The summer sun beat down on Red Hollow like a hammer on an anvil, turning the dirt streets into rivers of dust that clung to everything. Skin, clothes, hope. Clara Mayfield stood in the narrow alley behind Thornton's General Store, her back pressed against the rough wooden planks, her 5-year-old son Eli tucked against her side. His small hand clutched the fabric of her faded calico dress, and she could feel his heart beating fast against her ribs. "Mama, why can't we go see the parade?" Eli whispered, his brown eyes, so much like hers, so much like the father who'd abandoned them both, looking up at her with that mixture of confusion and acceptance that broke her heart every single day. "Hush now, sweetheart," Clara murmured, smoothing his dark hair with trembling fingers. "We'll watch from here. It's cooler in the shade." It was a lie, and they both knew it. There was no cool anywhere in Red Hollow this July afternoon, least of all in the shadows where people like Clara belonged. The sound of fiddle music drifted through the air, accompanied by laughter, and the thunder of horses' hooves as the Independence Day celebration took over Main Street. Clara could picture it all without looking. The bunting strung between buildings, the children waving small flags, the women in their Sunday best gathered in clusters, their voices rising and falling like sparrows at a watering hole. Talking, always talking, and she knew what they talked about. "There's that Mayfield woman," they'd say, their voices dropping to that particular pitch reserved for scandal. "Came here 6 years ago with some story about being widowed. Widowed! As if we couldn't count the months between her arrival and that child's birth. No ring on her finger, no grave to visit, no husband's name she'll speak aloud. Shameful is what it is. And still she stays here, bold as brass." Bold as brass. Clara almost laughed at that. There was nothing bold about the way she lived. Taking in washing and mending, cleaning houses before dawn and after dusk, accepting whatever work people would give her while barely meeting their eyes. There was nothing bold about the way she kept Eli close, always close, as if her arms could shield him from the truth of how he'd come into this world. But she stayed in Red Hollow because she had nowhere else to go, because running again would mean another town, another set of whispers, another round of proving she could work hard enough to earn the right to exist in the margins of respectable society. At least here, she knew which doors would open to her and which would remain forever closed. "Mama, look!" Eli's excited whisper pulled her from her thoughts. "Horses!" Despite herself, Clara leaned forward slightly, peering around the barrel that served as their shield. The parade was passing by. Ranchers on horseback, the mayor in his carriage, the school teacher leading a group of children carrying flowers. The whole town had turned out, it seemed, dressed in their finest, celebrating freedom and independence, celebrating everything Clara would never have. She was about to pull back when she felt it. That prickling awareness of being watched. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for the source, ready to retreat further into the shadows if necessary. That's when she saw him. A man stood at the edge of the boardwalk across the street, separate from the clusters of celebrating townsfolk. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dusty traveling clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. But even at this distance, Clara could tell he was looking directly at her hiding place, directly at her. Her breath caught. She pulled Eli closer, ready to flee deeper into the alley. But the stranger didn't move toward her, didn't call out, didn't signal to others or make any gesture of mockery or judgment. He simply stood there, and even though Clara couldn't see his expression clearly, something in his stillness made her pause. It wasn't the look she was used to, that mixture of disdain and dark curiosity that men sometimes gave her, as if her past made her somehow available to their worst assumptions. This was different. This was... She didn't have a word for it. Then someone jostled the stranger from behind, breaking his attention. He turned slightly, and Clara used that moment to gather Eli and slip further back into the alley, her heart pounding harder than the situation warranted. "Come on, sweet boy," she whispered. "Let's get home." "But Mama—" "Now, Eli." They walked quickly through the back ways of town, the routes Clara had memorized over 6 years of avoiding main streets and public gatherings. Behind the butcher shop, through the gap in the fence near the church, along the creek bed where the cottonwoods provided cover. By the time they reached the small cabin she rented at the edge of town, barely more than a shed, really, with a leaking roof and gaps in the walls, the celebration felt far away, like something happening in another world entirely. Inside, Clara lit the small stove and began preparing their meager supper, beans and cornbread, the same as most nights. Eli sat at the rough wooden table, drawing pictures in the dirt on the floor with a stick, humming a tune he must have heard from the parade. "Mama, who was that man?" he asked suddenly. Clara's hand stilled over the pot. "What man, honey?" "The one watching us. By the barrel." So Eli had noticed too. Clara forced her voice to remain calm. "Just someone passing through, I expect. Red Hollow gets a lot of travelers this time of year. He had a nice face." "You couldn't even see his face properly, Eli." Still knew it was nice. Her son's certainty made Clara smile despite herself. Eli had always been like that, reading people with an instinct that sometimes frightened her. As if he could see past the surfaces everyone else presented. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. That night, after Eli fell asleep on their shared bedroll in the corner, Clara sat by the window and looked out at Red Hollow. Lamplight glowed in distant windows. Somewhere, someone was playing a piano. The celebration had moved to the church social hall, where the respectable families would dance and eat and remind each other of their place in the community's hierarchy. And here she was, as always, on the outside looking in. Clara pressed her forehead against the cool glass. She was 23 years old. Sometimes she felt ancient, as if she'd lived several lifetimes already. Sometimes she felt impossibly young, like a girl playing at being a mother, hoping no one would notice she was making it all up as she went along. The truth was somewhere in between, she supposed. The truth was that she'd been 17 when she'd believed Charles Whitmore's promises. 17 when she'd let herself imagine a future that included love and marriage and all the things young girls dreamed about. 17 when he'd gotten what he wanted and disappeared, leaving her alone and ruined and carrying his child. Her parents had given her 2 choices: give up the baby or leave their home. Clara had chosen Eli, would choose him again, 1,000 times over. But that choice had cost her everything else. Her family, her reputation, any chance at the life she'd once imagined. And yet, she thought, watching Eli sleep, his small chest rising and falling in the lamplight, she'd gained something precious too. Someone who loved her unconditionally. Someone who thought she hung the moon and stars. Someone who made every hard day worthwhile, even if it meant hiding behind barrels at parades. Even if it meant a lifetime of being invisible. Clara was about to turn away from the window when she saw him again, the stranger from the parade. He was walking down the street, his gait unhurried, his hands in his pockets. As he passed under a street lamp, she got a better look at his face. Lean, weathered, probably early 30s. Not handsome in any conventional way, but striking. The kind of face that suggested hard living and quiet strength. He glanced toward her cabin, just a brief look, probably coincidental, and Clara jerked back from the window, her pulse racing. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "Stop reading meaning into nothing. He's just a stranger passing through. Tomorrow he'll be gone and you'll still be here, same as always." But that night, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara dreamed of something other than survival. She dreamed of being seen. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn as always, leaving Eli sleeping while she headed to Mrs. Thornton's house for her weekly cleaning job. The work was hard, scrubbing floors, beating rugs, polishing silver, but Mrs. Thornton paid promptly and never shorted her hours. It was one of the few reliable jobs Clara had managed to keep. She was on her hands and knees in the parlor, working on a stubborn stain in the carpet, when she heard Mrs. Thornton's voice in the hallway, speaking to someone. "Room's nothing fancy, Mr. Callahan, but it's clean, and the price is fair." My late husband's brother used to stay there when he visited. Rest his soul. Clara's hand stilled on the scrub brush. Mrs. Thornton rented out a room above her carriage house sometimes, to travelers who needed something more permanent than the hotel could offer. I appreciate it, ma'am, a male voice responded, low and measured. I expect I'll be in Red Hollow for a few months at least, working on the Morrison Ranch west of town. This'll suit me fine. Clara knew that voice, knew it from yesterday, from that moment of being watched. She bent lower over the carpet, making herself small, willing herself invisible. Well then, let me show you. Oh, Clara. Mrs. Thornton appeared in the doorway, and Clara had no choice but to look up. Goodness, child, you're working yourself to the bone. Take a moment's rest, why don't you? Clara rose to her feet, keeping her eyes down. But she could feel him there, in the hallway, could sense his presence like heat from a stove. Mr. Callahan, this is Clara Mayfield. She does cleaning and washing for several families in town. Clara, this is Reed Callahan. He'll be staying in the carriage house room. Clara forced herself to look up, to meet his eyes for just a moment. They were gray, she noticed. Storm cloud gray. And they held that same quality from yesterday, that watchful concern that made her want to flee and stay in equal measure. Ma'am, Reed said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect that seemed genuine. Mr. Callahan, Clara managed, her voice barely above a whisper. An awkward silence stretched between them. Mrs. Thornton, sensing something she couldn't quite name, cleared her throat. Well then, let me show you the room. Clara, dear, there's fresh bread in the kitchen when you're ready for a break. They left, and Clara sank back down to the floor, her hands shaking. It didn't mean anything, she told herself. So he'd be staying in town for a while. So what? Red Hollow was small, but not so small that she couldn't avoid one man, except that she cleaned Mrs. Thornton's house every Monday and Thursday. And the carriage house room had its own entrance, which meant Reed Callahan would be coming and going, visible from the very parlor where she was currently scrubbing floors. Clara attacked the stain with renewed vigor, as if she could scrub away the complication that had just walked into her carefully ordered life. She was wrong about being able to avoid him. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara saw Reed Callahan everywhere. Not because he was following her, she was certain of that, but because Red Hollow was indeed small, and their paths crossed with the inevitability of stars in their orbits. He nodded to her at the general store, where she was buying flour with coins she'd saved for 3 weeks. He held the door for her at the post office, where she was mailing a letter to a woman 2 towns over who sometimes sent sewing work her way. He stepped aside on the boardwalk when she passed with Eli, giving them room even though propriety said she should be the one to yield. Each time he was polite, respectful, brief. He never tried to engage her in conversation beyond a simple greeting, never looked at her with anything other than that quiet acknowledgement that had marked their first encounter. It was driving her mad, because Clara didn't know what to do with kindness that asked for nothing in return. She understood transactions, work for pay, service for coins, labor for survival. She understood judgment and avoidance and the cold shoulder of respectability. But this casual, consistent courtesy from a stranger? This was foreign territory. Mama, that's the man from the parade, Eli said one afternoon as they passed Reed on their way home from the creek, where Clara had been washing clothes. The one with the nice face. Hush, Eli, Clara whispered urgently. But Reed had heard. A small smile touched his mouth, the first time Clara had seen him smile. Got a good eye, son, he said to Eli, then tipped his hat to Clara and continued on his way. Eli tugged at her hand. See, Mama? I told you. That evening, Clara was hanging the last of the washing on the line behind their cabin when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned, ready to grab Eli and retreat inside, but it was just Mrs. Patterson from the neighboring property, a widow who'd always been kinder to Clara than most. Evening, Clara, Mrs. Patterson called out. Got fresh eggs if you need any? My hens are laying faster than I can use them. Oh, I couldn't, Clara started, but Mrs. Patterson waved her off. Nonsense. You know I hate to see food go to waste. Besides, that boy of yours is growing like a weed. He needs proper nourishment. She handed over 6 eggs wrapped in a cloth, and Clara accepted them with genuine gratitude. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. Truly. The older woman lingered, her eyes shrewd. Been seeing you around town with that new fellow, Reed Callahan. Clara's defenses slammed into place. I haven't been around town with anyone, ma'am. We've merely crossed paths a few times. I know that, child. Don't get your hackles up. Mrs. Patterson patted her arm. I'm just saying he's been asking questions. Clara's blood ran cold. What kind of questions? About work, mostly. About the town. But Mrs. Patterson hesitated. He asked about you, too. What did you tell him? Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. The truth. That you're a hard worker and a good mother. That you keep to yourself and don't cause trouble. Mrs. Patterson's eyes softened. What did you think I'd say? Clara felt shame wash over her. I'm sorry, I know, honey, I know. Mrs. Patterson squeezed her hand. But maybe not everyone's looking to hurt you. Maybe some folks are just curious or kind. After she left, Clara stood in the gathering dusk, holding the eggs and feeling the weight of words she didn't quite believe. In her experience, curiosity always came with a price. Kindness always had strings attached. She wouldn't let herself hope otherwise. The following Monday, Clara arrived at Mrs. Thornton's house to find the older woman in a state of mild panic. Oh, Clara, thank heavens you're here. I've got the ladies' auxiliary meeting this afternoon, and I'm nowhere near ready. Would you be a dear and take some fresh linens up to Mr. Callahan's room? I promised him clean sheets this morning, but I've been run off my feet. Clara's stomach dropped. Mrs. Thornton, I don't think... Please, dear, just leave them outside his door if you're uncomfortable. He's likely out at the Morrison Ranch anyway. Before Clara could protest further, Mrs. Thornton had pressed a stack of neatly folded linens into her arms and hurried off to deal with some crisis in the kitchen. Clara stood there, holding the sheets, weighing her options. She could refuse, but that might cost her this job. She could wait until she was certain Reed was gone, but that could take hours. Or she could just do the simple task quickly and be done with it. The carriage house was separate from the main building, accessed by an exterior staircase. Clara climbed slowly, listening for any sound of occupation. When she reached the landing, she breathed a sigh of relief. The door was closed, no sounds from within. She set the linens down, turned to leave. The door opened. Reed Callahan stood there in his shirt sleeves, his hair slightly damp as if he'd just washed up. For a moment, they both froze. Mrs. Thornton asked me to bring these, Clara stammered, gesturing to the linens. I didn't mean to disturb you. You're not disturbing me, Reed said calmly. He looked at the sheets, then at her. Thank you. Clara nodded, already turning to go. Mrs. Mayfield? His voice stopped her. Could I ask you something? Every instinct screamed at her to run, but something, pride maybe, or just exhaustion at always running, made her turn back. Yes? Your son, Eli, is it? He seems like a bright boy. Clara's maternal instincts flared instantly. He's none of your concern, Mr. Callahan. I didn't mean any offense. Reed held up his hands in a placating gesture. I've seen him around town sometimes, watching the other children play. He never joins in. That's not your business, Clara said, her voice tight. You're right. It's not. Reed leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. But I was once a boy who watched from the outside too. I know what that's like. The admission surprised her. Clara studied his face, looking for mockery or manipulation, but found only honesty. I thought maybe he'd like to learn his letters, Reed continued. I'm no school teacher, but I can read and write well enough, if you were amenable to it. Clara's mind raced. Was this some kind of trick? Some way to get close to her, to take advantage? Why would you want to do that? Reed shrugged. Because it's useful. Because every child deserves a chance to learn. Because, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Because I can. The school won't take him, Clara said, the admission bitter on her tongue. They say they're full, but everyone knows the real reason. I know. Of course he knew. Everyone in Red Hollow knew. Everyone knew that the children of fallen women weren't welcome in respectable places. So what exactly are you offering, Mr. Callahan? Clara asked, her voice hard. And what do you expect in return? Reed met her eyes steadily. I'm offering an hour a few evenings a week to teach your son to read. In return, I expect nothing except that he shows up willing to learn. Nothing. Nothing. Clara wanted to believe him. Wanted it so badly it terrified her. I don't accept charity, Mr. Callahan. It's not charity. It's education. There's a difference. Not to people like me. Reed was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What if you paid me? Clara laughed, a harsh sound. Pay you? With what? I barely have enough to feed and clothe my son. You could do my washing, Reed suggested. Mrs. Thornton offers laundry service, but I'd rather have someone who... He gestured vaguely. Someone who'd appreciate the work. It was clever, Clara realized. A way to make it a transaction, a trade. Her labor for Eli's learning. Not charity, not pity. Just business. She wanted to say yes. But years of hard lessons made her cautious. Why are you really doing this, Mr. Callahan? The truth. Reed considered the question for a long moment. Because I had a mother once who did everything she could to give me chances. And because I've seen enough of this world to know that kindness is rare, so when I can offer it, I do. It wasn't a complete answer, Clara sensed. There were shadows in his eyes that spoke of his own past wounds. But it was honest, and that was more than most people gave her. I'll think about it, she said finally. That's all I ask. Reed picked up the linens. Thank you for bringing these. Clara descended the stairs on shaking legs, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. She didn't trust easily, couldn't afford to, but something about Reed Callahan made her want to try. That evening, she asked Eli a question she'd never asked before. Would you like to learn to read, sweet boy? Eli's eyes went wide. Like the other children at school? Not exactly, but yes, reading and writing, letters and words. Could I read the signs in town, the ones that tell what the stores sell? Clara's heart clenched. She hadn't realized he'd noticed those signs, wondered about them. Yes, honey, you could read those. Then yes, I want to learn. His enthusiasm made the decision for her. That night, Clara wrote a short note to Reed Callahan, carefully worded, precise. She would accept his offer on 2 conditions. The lessons would take place in a public location, and she would do his washing and trade, 1 basket per week. She left the note at Mrs. Thornton's the next morning and spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous anticipation. Reed's response came that evening, delivered by a bemused Mrs. Patterson. That young man asked me to bring this to you, she said, handing over a folded piece of paper. Polite fellow. After she left, Clara opened the note with trembling fingers. Mrs. Mayfield, your terms are acceptable. We could meet at the church steps if Reverend Matthews allows it. Weather permitting, of course. Would Tuesday and Thursday evening suit? I'll wait for your confirmation. Respectfully, Reed Callahan. Clara read it 3 times, looking for hidden meanings or implications. Finding none, she wrote a simple response. Tuesday and Thursday evenings will suit. Thank you. It was only after she'd sent her reply that Clara allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she'd agreed to. For the first time in Eli's life, someone outside their small circle was offering to help. Someone was choosing to invest time and effort in her son. Someone was seeing them as worthy. Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, holding back the sob that wanted to escape. She couldn't let herself hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment and heartbreak. But as she tucked Eli into bed that night and told him about the reading lessons, seeing his face light up with pure joy, Clara felt something crack in the armor she'd built around her heart. Maybe, just maybe, Reed Callahan was exactly who he seemed to be. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most dangerous thing of all. The first lesson took place on a warm Tuesday evening, with the sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Clara sat on a bench near the church steps, pretending to mend a shirt while actually watching every moment of the interaction between Reed and Eli. Reed had brought a small slate and chalk, along with a worn primer that looked like it had seen better days. He sat on the steps with Eli beside him, showing him how to form the letter A. See how it's like a little house with a line through the middle? Reed said, his voice patient. Try drawing it. Eli clutched the chalk with fierce concentration, his tongue poking out the corner of his mouth as he carefully traced the letter. When he finished, he looked up at Reed with such hope that Clara's throat tightened. "That's good work, Eli," Reed said, and the boy's whole face lit up. "Real good. Now let's try B." Clara watched them for an hour, marveling at Reed's patience. He never raised his voice, never showed frustration when Eli struggled. He just kept encouraging, kept teaching, kept believing in her son's ability to learn. When the lesson ended, Eli ran to Clara, his eyes shining. "Mama, I can write A, B, C, D, and E. 5 whole letters." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Clara said, pulling him into a hug. Over his head, she met Reed's eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan." "Reed," he corrected gently. "And you're welcome." As they walked home, Eli chattered nonstop about everything he'd learned. Clara listened, her heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. Maybe kindness without strings really did exist. Maybe not everyone was looking to hurt them. Maybe. But that night, as Clara lay awake listening to the sounds of Red Hollow settling into sleep, reality crashed back in. She heard voices passing by her cabin. Women's voices, sharp with judgment. "Did you see her at the church today, letting that stranger teach her bastard child? Mark my words, she's got her sights set on him, probably thinks she can trap another man. Poor fellow doesn't know what he's getting into. Someone should warn him." Clara closed her eyes, willing the tears not to fall. This was why she didn't hope. This was why she kept her distance. Because people would always see the worst in her, would always assume the worst. And now Reed Callahan would hear those voices too, would realize what people thought of her, would understand the damage to his reputation that came from associating with her. The lessons would end. They always did. Nothing good ever lasted. Clara rolled over, pressing her face into her thin pillow, and let the tears come silently so Eli wouldn't hear. Tomorrow she would be strong again. Tomorrow she would go back to survival mode. Tomorrow she would remember that she was alone in this world, except for her son. But tonight, just for tonight, she let herself grieve for the brief, shining hope that had dared to bloom in her heart. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose boards of her cabin and carrying away the last notes of the piano from town. Somewhere in the darkness, Red Hollow slept, comfortable in its judgments and certain of its righteousness. And Clara Mayfield learned once again that she would never be anything more than the cautionary tale mothers told their daughters. The woman no decent man would choose. The woman hiding behind barrels at parades. The woman watching life happen to everyone else. But Clara was wrong about Reed Callahan. Thursday evening came, and she almost didn't bring Eli to the church steps. She'd spent 2 days convincing herself that Reed would send word canceling the lessons, that he'd heard the gossip and decided association with her wasn't worth the trouble. When no message came, she told herself he was simply too polite to cancel outright, that he'd just not show up and let the silence speak for itself. She was prepared for disappointment. What she wasn't prepared for was Reed sitting on the church steps at exactly the appointed time, the slate and primer beside him, looking as calm and steady as if the whole town wasn't talking about him. "Mama, he's here!" Eli broke free from her hand and ran toward Reed, who smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. "Course I'm here. We've got letters F through J to tackle today. That's a lot of work." Reed looked up at Clara, who stood frozen several feet away. "Evening, Mrs. Mayfield." Clara managed a nod, her throat too tight for words. She settled onto her usual bench, pulled out her mending, and watched as Reed began the lesson with the same patience he'd shown before. But she noticed something different tonight. Several women had positioned themselves near enough to observe, their faces sharp with curiosity and judgment. Mrs. Henderson from the millinery, the banker's wife, Mrs. Ashford, even young Sally Mae Tucker, who couldn't be more than 19 and had never spoken a kind word about Clara in her life. They were watching, waiting for something scandalous to confirm their suspicions. Reed noticed too. Clara saw his eyes flick toward the observers, saw the slight tightening of his jaw. But he didn't stop the lesson, didn't show any sign of discomfort. Instead, he raised his voice slightly, making sure every word carried. "That's excellent, Eli. You're a natural at this. Smart as a whip, just like your mama must be to have raised such a fine boy on her own." Clara's hand stilled on her mending. The watching women shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Reed, what does this word say?" Eli pointed to something in the primer. Let's sound it out together. What's this first letter? F. Good. And it makes what sound? Eli said, drawing out the sound. Perfect. Now, the next letter. They worked through the word together, family, and when Eli finally got it, Reed's praise was genuine and warm. That's right, family. That's an important word, isn't it? Everyone needs family. The lesson continued for the full hour, and through it all, Reed never once acknowledged the watching women except to nod politely when one of them finally gave up and walked away. By the time the sun was setting, only Mrs. Ashford remained, her expression sour. Same time next Tuesday? Reed asked Eli as they packed up the slate. Yes, sir, Eli beamed. Clara approached cautiously, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Mr. Callahan, Reed, I should tell you that people are talking. I know. It might damage your reputation, being seen with us. Reed stood, dusting off his pants. He looked at her directly, those gray eyes steady. Mrs. Mayfield, I've been a lot of places and done a lot of things in my life. I've learned that reputation means different things to different people. The kind of reputation I want isn't the kind that's damaged by teaching a child to read. But the things they're saying, let them say what they want. His voice was firm but not unkind. Their words can't touch what's true. Mrs. Ashford sniffed loudly from her position near the church door, clearly having heard every word. Reed tipped his hat to her with deliberate politeness. Evening, Mrs. Ashford. Beautiful sunset tonight. The woman's face reddened, and she hurried inside without responding. Clara didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You're either very brave or very foolish, Mr. Callahan. Maybe both. A slight smile touched his lips. Your washing, I left it with Mrs. Patterson this morning. Figured it'd be easier than you having to come to Mrs. Thornton's for it. It was a small thing, but it meant he'd been thinking about her convenience, about making things easier rather than harder. Clara wasn't sure what to do with that kind of consideration. Thank you, she managed. As they walked home through the dimming streets, Eli practicing his letters by tracing them in the air with his finger, Clara felt that dangerous flutter of hope again. And this time, she didn't quite have the strength to crush it down. Over the next 2 weeks, the lessons continued like clockwork. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, Reed and Eli on the church steps, Clara on her bench pretending not to notice the way the town watched and whispered. But something was shifting, subtle as the change of seasons. Reed never hid his association with them. If anything, he seemed to go out of his way to make it visible. He greeted Clara and Eli on the street in full view of everyone. He carried Clara's packages when he happened upon her at the general store, ignoring the wide-eyed stares of other customers. He asked Eli about his progress loudly enough for others to hear, praising the boy's intelligence without a hint of condescension. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, some people began to respond differently. Mr. Chen at the Mercantile, who'd always been coldly professional with Clara, started setting aside bruised fruit he couldn't sell, offering it to her at half price. For the boy, he'd say gruffly. Growing children need their vitamins. Mrs. Patterson became more openly friendly, inviting Clara and Eli over for supper one evening. Over simple stew and bread, she told stories about her own hard times after her husband died, about the judgment she'd faced, about the slow process of rebuilding a life. People like to think they're better than someone, Mrs. Patterson had said, pouring Clara more tea. Makes them feel secure in their own lives. But show them someone who refuses to play the victim, who stands tall despite everything, and it confuses them. Makes them wonder if maybe they've been wrong all along. I don't stand tall, Clara had protested. I hide, I avoid, You survive, Mrs. Patterson interrupted firmly. You take care of your child. You work hard. You hold your head up even when it feels like the weight of the world is pushing it down. That's standing tall, honey. That's exactly what that is. But it was Eli who truly thrived under Reed's attention. The boy who'd been quiet and withdrawn began to blossom like a flower finally given sunlight. He laughed more, spoke up more, started looking people in the eye instead of at the ground, and his hunger for learning was insatiable. Mama, did you know that letters make words and words make sentences and sentences make stories? Eli asked one night, his eyes bright with discovery. Mr. Reed says someday I'll be able to read whole books all by myself. Clara brushed his hair back from his forehead, her heart aching with love and fear in equal measure. That's wonderful, sweet boy. Mr. Reed says I'm smart. He says I could be anything I want when I grow up. Anything he wanted. Clara wondered what that must feel like, to believe the world was open to you. She'd never felt that way, even as a child. There had always been limitations, expectations, proper roles for proper girls. And then she'd stepped outside those roles, and the world had shown her exactly what it thought of women who broke the rules. But maybe, just maybe, Eli could have something different, something better. It was this thought that occupied her mind one Saturday afternoon as she worked in Mrs. Thornton's garden, pulling weeds and trimming back the roses. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear footsteps approaching until a shadow fell across her work. Mrs. Mayfield! Clara looked up to find Reed standing there, his hat in his hands. He looked uncertain, which was unusual for him. It made her nervous. Is something wrong? She asked, getting to her feet. Is it Eli? Did something happen? No, Eli's fine. I just saw him playing with some other children down by the creek. Reed shifted his weight. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Clara's stomach dropped. Here it comes, she thought. He's going to end the lessons. If this is about the talk in town, it's not. Well, not exactly. Reed glanced around, then seemed to come to a decision. Could we sit for a moment? There's a bench just there. Warily, Clara followed him to a small bench under a cottonwood tree, out of sight of the main house, but still properly public. She sat on the very edge, her back straight, prepared to flee if necessary. Reed sat down, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a long moment, he just looked at his hat, turning it in his hands. I want to tell you something, he said finally, about why I offered to teach Eli. The real reason. You don't owe me explanations, Mr. Callahan. Reed, and maybe I don't owe them, but I want to give them anyway. He met her eyes. I told you I had a mother who gave me chances. What I didn't tell you is that she was a lot like you. Clara stiffened. What do you mean? She had me young, wasn't married. My father was a man who made promises he didn't keep. Reed's voice was matter-of-fact, but Clara could hear the old pain underneath. She worked herself nearly to death trying to provide for me, trying to give me opportunities. And people judged her for it, whispered about her, made our lives harder than they needed to be. I'm sorry, Clara whispered. She died when I was 15, worked herself into an early grave. Reed's jaw tightened. And the people who judged her, who'd made her life hell, they came to her funeral and talked about what a tragedy it was. How sad. How unfortunate. As if they hadn't been part of the reason she had to work so hard in the first place. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She knew exactly the kind of false sympathy he was describing. The crocodile tears of people who contributed to suffering and then mourned it from a safe distance. When I see you with Eli, Reed continued, I see her. I see the same fierce love, the same determination, the same refusal to let shame define you. And I think about all the people who could have helped her, who could have made her life easier but didn't because they cared more about appearances than compassion. He turned to face her fully. I can't change what happened to my mother. Can't go back and make those people treat her better, but I can help you. I can be the person I wish someone had been for her. Clara's throat was too tight to speak. She'd been so certain that everyone's kindness came with strings, with expectations, with hidden costs. But this was something different. This was a man trying to heal his own wounds by preventing hers from cutting so deep. She'd be proud of you, Clara managed finally. Your mother, she'd be proud of the man you became. Reed's smile was sad and sweet at the same time. I hope so. And Clara, may I call you Clara? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Clara, I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. The lessons will continue as long as Eli wants them. And if people talk, let them talk. I've survived worse than gossip. You don't understand what you're risking, Clara said urgently. This town, they'll turn on you. They'll make your life difficult. They'll what? Refuse to invite me to their socials? Not include me in their church committees? Reed shook his head. Clara, I'm a ranch hand. I don't need their approval to do my job, and I don't need their acceptance to know who I am. It was such a simple statement, but it hit Clara like a physical blow. She'd spent 6 years trying to earn scraps of acceptance, trying to work hard enough and be quiet enough to deserve the basic dignity of existence. And here was Reed, utterly unconcerned with what others thought, secure in himself in a way she'd never been. "How do you do that?" she asked softly. "How do you not care?" "Oh, I care," Reed said. "I care about doing right by people. I care about being honest and fair. I care about standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. What I don't care about is the opinion of people whose respect isn't worth having in the first place." Before Clara could respond, they heard voices approaching. She immediately stood, putting distance between herself and Reed, old habits of propriety kicking in automatically. Mrs. Thornton appeared around the corner of the house, accompanied by 2 other women from the ladies' auxiliary. They stopped short when they saw Clara and Reed near the bench. "Oh," Mrs. Thornton said, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Callahan, Clara, I didn't realize you two were talking." The way she said talking made it sound like something illicit. "Just discussing the lessons," Reed said easily, standing and putting his hat back on. "Eli's making remarkable progress. You should be proud, Mrs. Thornton, letting us use the church steps. Education is a worthy cause." It was smoothly done, Clara had to admit. He'd reframed the situation from something suspicious to something philanthropic, and put Mrs. Thornton in a position where disagreeing would make her seem opposed to education. "Well, yes, of course," Mrs. Thornton said, flustered. "The church is for community benefit, after all." "That's what I've always admired about Red Hollow," Reed continued. "The way people here help each other. Take Clara here. Works harder than anyone I know and never complains. That's the kind of character this town should celebrate." The other 2 women exchanged glances. One of them, Mrs. Williams, cleared her throat. "Mr. Callahan, you're new here. You might not understand the full situation." "I understand perfectly, ma'am," Reed said, his voice still polite, but with an edge of steel underneath. "I understand that Clara Mayfield has been raising a fine boy on her own under difficult circumstances. I understand that she works multiple jobs to keep a roof over their heads and food on their table. I understand that Eli is one of the brightest children I've ever had the privilege to teach. What more is there to understand?" Mrs. Williams' face reddened. "Well, there are circumstances of birth to consider." "Circumstances of birth," Reed repeated slowly. "You mean the fact that Eli exists? That seems like something to celebrate, not condemn. The world needs more good people, and that boy is going to be one of them." Clara wanted to sink into the ground. This was exactly what she'd feared, Reed making himself a target by defending her. But she also felt a fierce surge of something she hadn't felt in years: pride. Someone was standing up for her. Someone was refusing to let her be diminished. Mrs. Thornton, sensing the tension, tried to smooth things over. "Well, I'm sure we all want what's best for the children. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have auxiliary business to discuss." She ushered the other women away, but not before Mrs. Williams shot Clara a look that promised this conversation wasn't over. Once they were alone again, Clara turned to Reed, torn between gratitude and fear. "You shouldn't have done that." "Done what? Told the truth?" "Made enemies for my sake. These women, they have power in this town. They can make things very difficult for you." Reed shrugged. "Then they'll make things difficult. I've dealt with difficult before." "You don't understand." "Clara." He said her name firmly enough to make her stop. "I understand more than you think. And I'm not going to apologize for treating you with the respect you deserve. If that costs me the good opinion of small-minded people, so be it." Clara stared at him. This man who'd walked into her life barely a month ago and turned it upside down. This man who saw her not as a cautionary tale or a scandal, but as a person worthy of dignity. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" Reed was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes searching hers. "Because someone should have cared about my mother. Because I know what it's like to be judged for things beyond your control. Because—" He hesitated, then continued more softly. "Because when I look at you, I see someone who's been fighting alone for too long. And I think maybe it's time you had someone in your corner." The words hit Clara like a wave, washing over defenses she'd maintained for 6 years. She felt herself trembling, felt the careful control she always maintained starting to crack. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to let someone help me. I don't know how to trust that it won't all fall apart." "Then we'll figure it out together," Reed said simply. "One day at a time, one lesson at a time. No expectations, no strings, just kindness." "Is that so hard to accept?" "Yes," Clara wanted to say. "Yes, it's impossibly hard because kindness has always come with a price, because people have always wanted something in return, because trust is a luxury I can't afford." But looking at Reed's honest face, at the steady compassion in his eyes, Clara felt something shift inside her. Maybe not everyone was like Charles Whitmore. Maybe not everyone would hurt her. Maybe some people really did offer kindness simply because they could. "One day at a time," she repeated softly, testing the words. "One day at a time," Reed confirmed. They stood there for a moment longer, the afternoon sun filtering through the cottonwood leaves, the sounds of Red Hollow going about its business all around them. And for the first time since she'd arrived in this town, Clara felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't facing it all alone. The feeling terrified her almost as much as it gave her hope. That evening, as Clara prepared supper, Eli burst through the door with more energy than she'd seen from him in weeks. "Mama, Mama, the most amazing thing happened!" "What is it, sweet boy?" Clara asked, stirring the pot of beans. "I was playing by the creek like usual, just watching the other kids, and this boy, Tommy Henderson, you know him? He came over and asked if I wanted to play catch with them." Clara's hand stilled on the spoon. Tommy Henderson was the son of the millinery owner, one of the children who'd always excluded Eli from their games. "And did you?" she asked carefully. "Yes, and Mama, I caught the ball 3 times. Tommy said I was good at it." Eli's face was glowing. "And then Sarah Miller asked if I wanted to help build a fort, and we all worked on it together, and they said I could come play again tomorrow if I wanted." Clara felt her eyes fill with tears. For 5 years, Eli had watched other children play from a distance, never invited, never included. And now, suddenly, that was changing. "That's wonderful, honey," she managed. "Do you think it's because of the reading lessons?" Eli asked. "Maybe they think I'm smarter now that Mr. Reed is teaching me." More likely, Clara thought, it was because Reed had publicly claimed them as worthy of his time and attention. Children took their cues from adults, and if a respected man like Reed Callahan thought Eli was worth teaching, then maybe the boy wasn't so different after all. It was a small shift, fragile as spring ice, but it was something. After Eli fell asleep that night, Clara sat by the window and thought about all the ways her life was changing. The small kindnesses from Mr. Chen, Mrs. Patterson's friendship, Eli's reading progress, and through it all, steady as a heartbeat, Reed Callahan's presence. She thought about what he'd told her about his mother, about his reasons for helping them. It made sense now, the way he treated Eli with such patient attention, the way he refused to let Clara's past define her present. But it also scared her, because Clara could feel herself starting to depend on that steadiness, could feel herself beginning to believe that maybe things could be different, and dependence was dangerous. Belief was dangerous. Everything could still fall apart. The thought had barely formed when Clara heard shouting from somewhere in town. She tensed, listening. More voices joined in, angry and urgent, then the sound of running feet. Clara went to the door, peering out into the darkness. Other neighbors were emerging from their homes, looking toward Main Street where an orange glow was beginning to light up the night sky. Fire. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her fence. "Clara, there's a fire at the Morrison Ranch. They're calling for all able-bodied men to help." The Morrison Ranch, where Reed worked. Clara's heart seized in her chest. She looked back at Eli, sleeping peacefully, then at Mrs. Patterson. "Can you watch him?" she asked urgently. "Of course, but Clara, where are you?" But Clara was already running, her skirts hiked up, her feet flying over the dark streets toward the glow on the horizon. She told herself it was just concern for a fellow human being, that anyone would want to know if the ranch hands were safe. But deep down, she knew the truth. Somewhere between the first reading lesson and today, Reed Callahan had become important to her. More than just Eli's teacher. More than just a kind stranger. And the thought of something happening to him made her chest tight with a fear she hadn't let herself feel in 6 years. By the time Clara reached the outskirts of town, a crowd had gathered. Men with buckets were organizing a water line. Women were setting up bandages and medical supplies. And in the distance, the Morrison Ranch barn blazed against the night sky like a bonfire. Clara searched the crowd frantically, looking for Reed's tall form. She pushed through clusters of people, ignoring the surprised looks and whispered comments about her presence. "Have you seen Reed Callahan?" she asked anyone who would listen. The ranch hand, tall, gray eyes. "He's out there," someone said, pointing toward the burning barn. He and Morrison were trying to get the horses out. Clara's blood ran cold. She pushed forward, getting as close as the heat would allow, her eyes straining through the smoke and chaos. And then she saw him. Reed emerged from the barn leading 2 panicked horses, his face covered in soot, his shirt singed. He handed the horses off to waiting hands and turned back toward the inferno. "Reed!" Clara screamed his name without thinking, without caring who heard. He turned, shocked to see her there. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Then Morrison grabbed Reed's arm, shouting something Clara couldn't hear over the roar of the flames. Reed shook his head, gesturing back at the barn. There were still horses inside. Clara watched in horror as Reed tied a wet cloth over his face and plunged back into the burning building. The crowd held its collective breath. Seconds felt like hours. When Reed emerged again, leading 3 more horses and coughing violently, Clara felt something inside her break wide open. All the careful walls she'd built, all the protection she'd wrapped around her heart, all the defenses that had kept her safe and alone, they crumbled like ash. She cared about this man, cared in a way that went beyond gratitude, beyond friendship, beyond anything she could safely contain. And caring, Clara had learned long ago, was the most dangerous thing of all. The fire burned for 3 more hours before the last flames were finally extinguished. By then, the barn was a total loss, reduced to smoking timbers and ash. But all the horses had been saved, and miraculously, no one had been seriously injured. Clara stood at the edge of the dispersing crowd, her heart still hammering in her chest, watching as Reed accepted a blanket from Mrs. Morrison and a cup of water from one of the other ranch hands. His face was black with soot, his clothes ruined, but he was alive. He was whole. She should leave, should slip away before anyone noticed her, before questions were asked about why she'd run all the way out here in the middle of the night. But her feet wouldn't move. She stood rooted to the spot, unable to look away from Reed's tall form. And then, as if sensing her presence, Reed turned and looked directly at her. The crowd seemed to fall away. The noise and chaos faded. For a heartbeat, there was only the 2 of them, connected by something Clara couldn't name and didn't dare examine too closely. Reed handed the blanket to someone and started walking toward her, his gait steady despite obvious exhaustion. Clara's breath caught as he approached, close enough now that she could see the concern in his gray eyes, despite the soot streaking his face. "Clara," he said, his voice rough from smoke. "What are you doing here?" "I heard about the fire. I needed to—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. What could she say? That she'd abandoned her sleeping son to make sure a man she barely knew was safe? That the thought of him in danger had driven every rational thought from her mind? "You needed to what?" Reed prompted gently. "Make sure you were all right," Clara finished quietly. Something flickered in Reed's expression, something warm and wondering that made Clara's stomach flip. But before either of them could say more, a sharp voice cut through the moment. "Well, isn't this touching?" Clara turned to find Mrs. Henderson standing nearby, her arms crossed, her expression venomous. Several other women clustered behind her, their faces ranging from curious to disapproving. "The Mayfield woman, running to check on her gentleman friend in the middle of the night," Mrs. Henderson continued, her voice carrying across the remaining crowd. How very concerned of her. Clara felt her face flush hot with shame and anger. "I was worried about the ranch hands. Anyone would be." "Anyone would be worried, certainly," Mrs. Henderson agreed with false sweetness. "But not everyone would come running out here alone, at night, looking like—" She gestured dismissively at Clara's disheveled appearance, her mud-spattered skirts, her loose hair. "Well, It raises questions about the nature of your concern. That's enough. Reed's voice was quiet, but carried an edge of steel Clara had never heard before. Mrs. Henderson, you can take your questions and your implications back to town. Clara came out here same as everyone else, to help if she could. She came out here for you, Mr. Callahan. Everyone can see it. Mrs. Henderson's smile was cruel. Poor man probably doesn't even know what he's gotten himself into. Teaching her bastard child, defending her in public, and now this. People are starting to wonder about your judgment. Reed took a step forward, and Clara saw several of the watching men tense, ready to intervene if necessary. But when Reed spoke, his voice was perfectly controlled. My judgment is just fine, ma'am. What concerns me is yours. A barn just burned down, horses could have died, men risked their lives, and you're standing here gossiping like this is a church social. That tells me everything I need to know about your priorities. Mrs. Henderson's face mottled with anger. How dare you speak to me that way? I'm a respected member of this community. I have standing. You have a poisonous tongue and too much time on your hands, Reed said flatly. And I'm done listening to you use both against someone who's done nothing to deserve it. A shocked silence fell over the remaining crowd. No one spoke to Mrs. Henderson this way. Her husband owned the millinery and sat on the town council. She wielded considerable social power in Red Hollow, but Reed didn't seem to care. Clara, he said, turning his back on Mrs. Henderson entirely, let me walk you home. It's late. I can manage on my own, Clara said automatically, even as every part of her wanted to accept his offer. I know you can, but I'd like the company if you don't mind. It was perfectly phrased, framing it as his need rather than hers, giving her a way to accept without appearing to need rescuing. Clara found herself nodding before she could think better of it. They walked away from the smoking ruins of the barn, leaving behind the clusters of whispering townsfolk. Clara could feel their eyes boring into her back, could imagine the conversations that would take place tomorrow. But for once, she couldn't bring herself to care as much as she should. Reed had almost died tonight. That reality overshadowed everything else. They walked in silence for a while, following the dark road back toward town. The night air was cool against Clara's flushed cheeks, carrying the acrid smell of smoke and burnt wood. You shouldn't have done that, Clara said finally. Stood up to Mrs. Henderson like that. She'll make you pay for it. Let her try. Reed's voice was calm. I've faced down worse than a spiteful woman with social aspirations. You don't understand how this town works. The Hendersons have influence. They can what, Clara? Reed stopped walking and turned to face her. Fire me. Morrison values a man who'll run into a burning barn to save his horses over a man who kowtows to the town gossips. Exclude me from social events? I don't want to attend them anyway. Spread rumors? They're already doing that. But your reputation? My reputation is my own business, and I'll stake it on whatever I damn well please. The vehemence in his voice surprised Clara, including defending a woman who deserves better than the treatment this town gives her. Clara stared at him, this soot-stained man who'd nearly died tonight, and was now standing in the middle of a dark road arguing about her honor. It was absurd. It was terrifying. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for her. The thought shocked her so much she actually stepped back. What is it? Reed asked, concerned. Did I say something wrong? No, Clara wrapped her arms around herself. I don't understand you, Reed Callahan. I don't understand why you care so much about this. About me? Reed was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the darkness. When he spoke, his voice was softer. Do you want to know what I saw that first day? At the parade? Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. I saw a woman who was beautiful and sad, hiding in the shadows with her son, protecting him. And I saw the way she looked at the celebration, not with envy exactly, but with this longing, like she was watching a life she'd never be allowed to have. Reed took a careful step closer. And I thought, that's wrong. That's fundamentally wrong that someone should have to hide like that. I made my choices, Clara whispered. I knew the consequences. Did you? Or were the consequences decided for you by people who'd made their own mistakes but had the money and position to hide them better? Reed shook his head. Clara, you were 17. You were lied to by a man who should have known better. And instead of that man facing consequences, you've paid the price for 6 years. Where's the justice in that? There is no justice, there's just what is. Then maybe it's time for what is to change. Clara laughed, a bitter sound. Change? In Red Hollow? Reed, these people have known me for 6 years and still treat me like a leper. What makes you think anything's going to change now? Because I'm not going anywhere. Reed's voice was firm. And I'm not going to stop treating you with respect. I'm not going to stop teaching Eli. I'm not going to stop standing up to people like Mrs. Henderson when they try to diminish you. And eventually, maybe other people will start to see what I see. What do you see? The question escaped before Clara could stop it. Reed looked at her for a long moment, and even in the darkness, Clara could see the intensity in his eyes. I see a woman who's stronger than she knows. A mother who'd sacrifice anything for her child. Someone who works 3 times as hard as anyone else and never complains. Someone who's been beaten down by life but refuses to stay down. He paused. I see someone worth knowing, worth defending, worth... He trailed off, but the unspoken word hung between them like smoke. Worth loving. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was certain Reed could hear it. This was dangerous territory, far more dangerous than any burning barn. This was the kind of conversation that could change everything, that could break what little safety she'd managed to build. Reed, I can't. She stopped, struggling to find words. I can't be what you might want me to be. I'm damaged. I'm ruined. I come with complications and a past and a child who isn't yours. Any association with me will only bring you trouble. You're not damaged, Reed said firmly. You're not ruined. Those are words other people use to control you, to make you feel less than. But they're not true, Clara. They were never true. How can you say that? Everyone knows what I am. They know your circumstances. They don't know you. There's a difference. Reed took another step closer, and Clara's breath caught. These past weeks, teaching Eli, talking with you, seeing how you navigate this world, I've gotten to know you. The real you, not the story people tell. And everything I've learned makes me think you're one of the finest people I've ever met. Tears sprang to Clara's eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not her parents, who'd cast her out. Not Charles, who'd used pretty words to manipulate her. Not anyone in Red Hollow who saw only her shame. You barely know me, she whispered. I know enough. I know you love your son more than your own comfort. I know you work yourself to exhaustion to provide for him. I know you're teaching him to be kind even though the world hasn't been kind to you. I know you hold your head high even when people try to make you bow it. Reed's voice softened. That's enough for me. Clara felt something crack inside her chest, like ice breaking apart in spring. All the fear, all the shame, all the years of holding herself rigid and alone, it all came flooding out in a rush of tears she couldn't control. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold it together, but it was too late. The dam had broken. And then Reed's arms were around her, pulling her gently against his chest, and Clara found herself sobbing into his soot-stained shirt while he held her and murmured soft, wordless sounds of comfort. I'm sorry, she gasped between sobs. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I'm... Shh, you don't have to apologize. You don't have to be strong every second of every day. Reed's hand moved in slow circles on her back. It's all right to let it out. So Clara did. She cried for the girl she'd been at 17, so full of hope and dreams. She cried for the years of loneliness and struggle. She cried for all the times she'd had to be brave when she was terrified, strong when she was breaking. She cried for Eli, growing up with a mother who was too afraid to let anyone close. She cried for herself, standing here in the arms of a man who seemed to see her as something other than a mistake. And through it all, Reed just held her, steady and warm and utterly patient. When the storm finally passed and Clara pulled back, embarrassed by her outburst, Reed handed her a relatively clean handkerchief from his pocket. I've gotten you all wet, Clara said, dabbing at her eyes. I was already covered in soot and sweat. A few tears won't hurt anything. Reed smiled gently. Feel better? Surprisingly, she did. Clara felt lighter somehow, as if crying had released some of the weight she'd been carrying for so long. Yes, she admitted. Thank you. For what? For not running away. For not treating me like I'm broken. For just... Clara gestured helplessly. For being here. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. The simple honesty in his voice made Clara's heart ache. She looked up at him, this man who'd walked into her life and refused to walk away no matter how many reasons she gave him to do so. Reed, what are we doing? She asked softly. I don't know, he admitted, but I know I don't want to stop. They stood there in the darkness, the ruins of the Morrison barn still smoldering in the distance, the town of Red Hollow sleeping ahead of them, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. A kind of surrender, but not the hopeless kind she'd experienced at 17. This was different. This was choosing to trust, even though trust was terrifying. Neither do I, she whispered. Reed's expression transformed, relief and joy mixing with something deeper. Clara, but I'm scared, she interrupted, needing him to understand. I'm so scared, Reed, of what this could mean, of what could go wrong, of what people will say and do, of how much it would hurt if... She couldn't finish the sentence. If I leave, Reed finished gently. Clara, I can't promise nothing will go wrong. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise I won't leave just because things get hard. I won't abandon you when the gossip gets worse. I'm not Charles Whitmore, and I'm not going anywhere. The use of Charles's name surprised Clara. How did you... Small town. People talk. I know who he was and what he did. Reed's jaw tightened. And if I ever meet him, it'll take considerable restraint not to knock him down for what he did to you. Despite everything, Clara felt a small smile tug at her lips. Violence isn't the answer. Maybe not, but it would be satisfying. They started walking again, slower now, neither of them eager to reach town and end this strange, fragile moment they'd created. What happens now? Clara asked. Now we keep going, Reed said simply. I keep teaching Eli. You keep doing my washing. We keep being honest with each other. And we let whatever this is between us develop at its own pace. People will talk. People are already talking. It will get worse. Probably. Reed glanced at her. Does that change how you feel? Clara thought about it. Did it? A week ago, even a day ago, she would have said yes, would have let the fear of judgment make her decisions for her. But tonight, watching Reed risk his life for horses that weren't even his, seeing him stand up to Mrs. Henderson without flinching, feeling him hold her while she cried, tonight she felt different. No, she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. It doesn't change how I feel. And how do you feel? It was a direct question, the kind Clara usually deflected or avoided, but Reed had been nothing but honest with her. He deserved honesty in return. Terrified, she admitted, but also hopeful, which terrifies me even more, because hope is dangerous. Hope is necessary, Reed countered. Without it, we're just surviving. And Clara, you deserve more than survival. You deserve a life. They reached the edge of town where the houses began and the open road ended. Claire could see her small cabin in the distance, could make out Mrs. Patterson's place next door where Eli was hopefully still sleeping peacefully. I should go check on Eli, she said reluctantly. Of course. Reed stopped walking but didn't immediately step away. Clara, there's something I want to ask you, but if it's too much, too soon, just say so. Clara's heart started racing again. What is it? The town social. It's in 2 weeks. Would you... Reed took a breath. Would you let me escort you, publicly, as my guest? Clara's mind reeled. The town social was Red Hollow's biggest event of the summer. Everyone attended, everyone watched. It was where social hierarchies were reinforced, where acceptable people mingled and unacceptable people were excluded. Clara had never been invited to a town social, had never even considered attending one. Reed, I can't. They wouldn't let me in. And even if they did, it would cause such a scene. They can't bar you from entering, Reed said. It's a public event, held in the church hall. And yes, it will cause a scene. That's rather the point. Clara stared at him. You want to cause a scene? I want to make a statement, Reed corrected. I want everyone in Red Hollow to see that I choose to be with you, that I'm not ashamed of it, that I think you're worthy of respect and dignity." He held her gaze. "But only if you want to. I won't push you into something you're not ready for." It was too much, too public, too risky. Everything in Clara screamed to refuse, to protect herself, to stay in the shadows where it was safe. But then she thought about Eli, laughing with the other children for the first time, about the small shifts she'd seen in how some people treated her, about the way Reed had held her tonight, making her feel safe and valued, about the life she wanted versus the life she'd settled for. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need," Reed smiled. "Though I should warn you, if you say yes, I'm going to ask you to dance, in front of everyone." The image was so absurd, so impossible, that Clara actually laughed. "You're either very brave or completely insane." "Told you before." "Probably both." Reed's expression grew serious. "But Clara, whether you come to the social or not, whether you ever feel ready for something public or not, I want you to know, I'm on your side. I'm in your corner. That doesn't change." Clara felt tears threaten again. She'd been alone for so long, fighting every battle by herself, that having someone explicitly declare themselves as her ally felt overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank me by getting some rest. It's been a long night." Reed touched her arm briefly, a feather-light gesture. "And Clara, you were brave to come out to that fire, to let yourself care enough to be worried. Don't forget that." He left her then, walking toward Mrs. Thornton's house where his room waited. Clara stood in the darkness, watching him go, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She'd cried in his arms. He'd asked her to the social. He'd said she was worth knowing, worth defending, worth whatever that unfinished sentence might have contained. Clara walked to Mrs. Patterson's house and quietly retrieved Eli, who barely stirred as she carried him home. She tucked him into their bedroll, then sat by the window as she'd done so many nights, looking out at Red Hollow. But tonight, the town looked different somehow, less like a prison and more like a place where change might actually be possible. Reed Callahan had walked into her life like a storm, disrupting everything she'd carefully constructed. And despite all her fear, despite all the reasons she should run, Clara found herself hoping that the storm wouldn't pass. She touched her fingers to the place on her arm where Reed had briefly made contact, could still feel the warmth of his arms around her, could still hear his voice saying she wasn't damaged or ruined. 2 weeks. The social was in 2 weeks. Clara didn't know if she'd have the courage to accept Reed's invitation, but for the first time in 6 years she was actually considering it, and that, in itself, was a kind of revolution. The next morning, Clara woke to find Red Hollow buzzing with news of the fire and its aftermath. But as she made her way through town doing her various jobs, she realized the gossip had taken an unexpected turn. People were talking about Reed's bravery, about how he'd risked his life for Morrison's horses, about how he'd been the first one into the barn and the last one out. Morrison himself was apparently singing Reed's praises to anyone who'd listen, calling him the finest ranch hand he'd ever employed. And tangled up in all that admiration was talk of Reed's defense of Clara. "Did you hear what he said to Mrs. Henderson?" one woman whispered to another as Clara passed by on the street. "Called her out right there in front of everyone. Said she had a poisonous tongue." Well, someone needed to say it. Mildred Henderson's been ruling this town with gossip for too long. Still, to defend that Mayfield woman so publicly, maybe he sees something we don't. It was only 2 women, only one small conversation, but it was different from the usual talk. There was a hint of doubt, a crack in the certainty that had always surrounded judgment of Clara. At Mrs. Thornton's house, the older woman was unusually thoughtful as Clara worked. "That Mr. Callahan certainly is loyal," Mrs. Thornton said, watching Clara polish the silver. "Doesn't back down when he believes in something." "No, ma'am," Clara said carefully. "Reminds me of my late husband in that way. He once stood up to the whole town council over a matter of principle. Cost him business for a while, but he never regretted it." Mrs. Thornton paused. "Sometimes it takes someone from outside to show us when we've been wrong about something." Clara's hand stilled on the teapot she was polishing. "Mrs. Thornton? I've known you for 6 years, Clara. Watched you work yourself near to death to provide for that boy. Never once seen you shirk a job or complain about your lot. Maybe..." The older woman sighed. Maybe some of us have been too quick to judge and too slow to show Christian charity. It wasn't an apology exactly, but for Mrs. Thornton it was something. Thank you, ma'am, Clara managed. The shift was small, fragile as a soap bubble, but it was there, and Clara could feel it in the air like the change of seasons. Reed Callahan had done this. With his quiet steadfastness, his refusal to participate in the town's judgment, his public defense of her character. He was forcing Red Hollow to reconsider its certainties. And in 2 weeks, if Clara found the courage to accept his invitation, he was going to push them even further. The question was, did she have the strength to stand beside him when he did? Clara finished her work, collected Eli from Mrs. Patterson's, and walked home through streets that felt somehow different than they had yesterday. The shadows weren't quite as deep. The whispers weren't quite as sharp. And for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, Clara allowed herself to imagine walking into that church hall on Reed Callahan's arm, her head held high, claiming a place at the table she'd been denied for so long. The image terrified her, but it also, secretly, thrilled her. Because maybe Reed was right. Maybe it was time for what was to change. Maybe it was time for Clara Mayfield to stop hiding and start living. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do it alone. The days leading up to the social passed in a strange blur of anticipation and dread. Clara went through her usual routines, cleaning houses, taking in washing, mending clothes by lamplight, but her mind was elsewhere, circling endlessly around Reed's invitation and what accepting it would mean. She hadn't given him an answer yet. Every time she opened her mouth to say yes, fear closed her throat. Every time she decided to refuse, she'd see Eli practicing his letters with such joy, or remember the feeling of Reed's arms around her, and the refusal would die unspoken. Reed, to his credit, didn't push. He continued the reading lessons with Eli twice a week, treated Clara with the same respectful kindness, and never once mentioned the social. But Clara could see the question in his eyes every time they parted, could feel it hanging in the air between them like morning mist. A week before the event, Clara was hanging washing behind her cabin when Mrs. Patterson appeared at the fence, her arms full of fabric. "Clara, dear, do you have a moment?" Clara wiped her damp hands on her apron and walked over. "Of course, Mrs. Patterson. What can I do for you?" The older woman's eyes were twinkling with barely suppressed excitement. "It's more what I can do for you. I've been doing some sewing, and I made rather too much, thought you might have use for this." She held out the fabric, and Clara's breath caught. It was a dress, a beautiful dress in deep blue cotton, with delicate white piping at the collar and cuffs. Simple enough to be appropriate, but finer than anything Clara had worn in years. "Mrs. Patterson, I can't." "Before you say you can't, hear me out." Mrs. Patterson's expression grew serious. "I know Reed Callahan asked you to the social. Half the town knows. And I know you're afraid to go, but Clara, honey, I think you should." "Why?" Clara's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Because that young man is giving you a gift. He's offering to stand beside you publicly, to claim you as someone worthy of respect. That's not something that comes along often in life." Mrs. Patterson pressed the dress into Clara's hands. "And because I've watched you hide in shadows for 6 years, and I think it's about time you stepped into the light." Clara looked down at the dress, her vision blurring with tears. What if it goes terribly? What if people are cruel? What if it makes everything worse for Eli? "What if it doesn't?" Mrs. Patterson countered gently. "What if Reed's right? What if forcing people to see you differently starts to change how they treat you? You won't know unless you try." "I'm so scared," Claire admitted. "I know you are. But you're also one of the bravest people I know. You've survived things that would have broken a lesser woman. You've raised a beautiful child alone. You've held your head high when the whole world tried to make you bow it." Mrs. Patterson squeezed her hand. "This is just one more battle, honey, and this time you won't be fighting it alone." After Mrs. Patterson left, Clara took the dress inside and hung it carefully on a nail in the wall. It hung there like a promise, like a possibility, like a challenge. Eli noticed it immediately when he came home from playing with the other children, something that still made Clara's heart sing every time it happened. "Mama, that's a pretty dress. Where did it come from?" "Mrs. Patterson made it," Clara said, running her fingers over the soft fabric. "Are you going to wear it somewhere special?" Clara took a breath. "Maybe. There's a town social in a few days. Mr. Reed asked if I'd like to go with him. Eli's eyes went wide. Like a party? With music and dancing? Yes, something like that. Are you going to go? There was such hope in her son's voice that Clara's heart clenched. I don't know yet, sweet boy. I'm thinking about it. I think you should go, Eli said with the absolute certainty only a 5-year-old could muster. Mr. Reed is nice, and you deserve to go to parties too, Mama. Out of the mouths of babes, Clara thought. Her son, who'd seen her excluded from everything, who'd grown up knowing they were different, thought she deserved to attend the social. When had she stopped believing she deserved anything at all? That night, after Eli was asleep, Clara tried on the dress. It fit perfectly, as if Mrs. Patterson had known her measurements by heart. Clara stood in front of their small, cracked mirror and barely recognized herself. The woman looking back at her wasn't the worn-down washerwoman or the shamed single mother. She was just Clara, young still, at 23, with clear brown eyes and dark hair that fell in waves when she let it down from its usual severe bun. She was pretty, she realized with some surprise. Not beautiful like the fancy ladies in their imported gowns, but pretty in a quiet, natural way. When had she stopped seeing herself as anything other than a mistake? Clara touched her reflection in the mirror, tracing the face of the girl she'd once been, the one who'd believed in love and happy endings before life taught her otherwise. That girl was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of shame and survival. Maybe it was time to let her breathe again. The next morning, Clara found Reed at Mrs. Thornton's repairing a fence in the back garden. Her heart hammered as she approached, the words she'd rehearsed all night suddenly tangled on her tongue. Reed? He looked up, surprise and pleasure crossing his face. Clara, is everything all right? Is Eli? Eli's fine. He's with Mrs. Patterson. Clara twisted her hands in her apron. I wanted to talk to you about the social. Reed set down his hammer carefully, giving her his full attention. All right. I've been thinking about your invitation, about what it would mean, about everything. Clara forced herself to meet his eyes. And I've decided, if the offer still stands, I'd like to accept. Reed's face transformed, joy lighting his features like sunrise. Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured. I'm terrified, Clara interrupted honestly. I'm terrified it will be awful. I'm terrified people will be cruel. I'm terrified I'll embarrass you or make things worse for myself. She took a shaky breath. But I'm also tired of being scared, tired of hiding, tired of letting other people's judgment dictate my life. So yes, I'm sure. If you still want to escort me, I'll go. Reed closed the distance between them in 2 strides. For a moment, Clara thought he might embrace her, but he stopped himself, respecting the public setting. Instead, he took her hand gently, his calloused fingers warm against hers. I would be honored, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Truly honored, Clara. I have a dress, Clara found herself saying. Mrs. Patterson made it for me. It's blue. I'm sure you'll look beautiful. Reed smiled. Though you look beautiful now, covered in soap suds and worry. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. No one had called her beautiful in 6 years. You're just being kind. I'm being honest. There's a difference. Reed squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. The social starts at 7. I'll come by your cabin at 6:30 to walk you there? That would be... Yes. Thank you. They stood there for a moment, grinning at each other like conspirators planning a revolution, which, in a way, they were. Word of Clara's acceptance spread through Red Hollow faster than wildfire. By afternoon, everyone seemed to know that Reed Callahan was publicly escorting the Mayfield woman to the social. The reactions ranged from scandalized to intrigued to, surprisingly, approving. About time someone stood up to the gossips, Clara heard Mr. Chen mutter to a customer at the general store. But there was plenty of opposition, too. Mrs. Henderson was apparently beside herself, declaring she might not attend the social if that woman was going to be there. Several other ladies had apparently agreed with her, though Clara suspected their resolve would crumble when curiosity got the better of them. The day before the social, Clara was cleaning the schoolhouse, a job she'd recently acquired after the previous cleaner quit, when she heard the door open. She looked up to find Miss Sarah Winters, the schoolteacher, standing in the doorway. Clara's first instinct was to flee. Miss Winters was the one who'd refused to admit Eli to school, who'd given Clara that pitying but firm explanation about standards and appropriateness. "Mrs. Mayfield," Miss Winters said, her voice carefully neutral, "may I speak with you for a moment?" Clara straightened, her shoulders tensing for whatever blow was coming. "Of course, Miss Winters." The teacher stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She was young, perhaps 25, with kind eyes and a practical manner. She'd always been polite to Clara, but distant, maintaining the professional boundaries expected of someone in her position. "I wanted to tell you something," Miss Winters began, then seemed to struggle with how to continue. "I've been thinking about Eli, about my decision not to admit him to the school." Clara's heart started to pound. "I understand your position, Miss Winters. You have standards to maintain." "Do I?" The teacher laughed bitterly. "Or do I have prejudices to uphold? There's a difference, Mrs. Mayfield, and I'm beginning to realize I've been on the wrong side of it." Clara stared at her, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I've been watching your son around town," Miss Winters continued, "watching him learn his letters with Mr. Callahan, watching him play with the other children, and I've realized something. He's a bright, sweet, well-mannered child who deserves an education just as much as any other student in my classroom." She met Clara's eyes directly. "His circumstances of birth have nothing to do with his character or potential." "Then why—" Clara's voice broke. "Why did you refuse him?" "Because I was a coward," Miss Winters said simply. "Because I was afraid of what the school board would say, what parents would think, what it might cost me professionally. I hid behind rules and standards because it was easier than fighting for what was right." She paused. "But watching Mr. Callahan stand up for you and Eli, watching him face down the gossips without flinching, watching him risk his own reputation to defend yours, it made me realize I've been failing as an educator and as a human being." Clara felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. "I can't promise the school board will approve," Miss Winters said, "but I want to try again. I want to formally petition them to admit Eli to school in the fall term. And this time, I'll fight for it, instead of just accepting their prejudices." "Why now?" Clara whispered. "What changed?" Miss Winters smiled sadly. "Sometimes it takes seeing someone else's courage to realize your own cowardice. Mr. Callahan showed me that, and so did you by accepting his invitation to the social. You're both choosing to face judgment head-on rather than hide from it. The least I can do is show the same bravery." Clara couldn't speak through her tears. She could only nod, over and over, while Miss Winters stepped forward and gently squeezed her shoulder. "We'll talk more after the social," the teacher said. "But I wanted you to know before tomorrow night, there are people in this town who are starting to see things differently. Mr. Callahan's actions are making waves, Mrs. Mayfield. Good waves." After Miss Winters left, Clara sank down on one of the school benches and let herself cry, but these were different tears than she'd shed in Reed's arms. These were tears of hope, of possibility, of doors beginning to crack open after being locked shut for so long. Eli might go to school, might learn alongside other children, might have the chances she'd thought were forever denied to him, all because Reed Callahan had decided she was worth defending. That evening, Clara told Eli about Miss Winters' visit. His reaction was immediate and pure. "I could go to real school? With books and slates and everything?" "Maybe, sweetheart. Nothing's certain yet. But Miss Winters is going to try to get you admitted." Eli threw his arms around Clara's neck. "This is the best thing that's ever happened. Can I tell Mr. Reed at our next lesson?" "You can tell him tomorrow night when he comes to take me to the social," Clara said. "But Eli, I need you to understand something. Even if Miss Winters tries, the school board might say no. Some things take time to change." "But they might say yes, too," Eli pointed out with irrefutable logic. "And that's better than before, when there was no chance at all." Out of the mouths of babes, again. Her son understood something Clara was still struggling to grasp. That possibility, even uncertain possibility, was better than the certainty of closed doors. The night of the social arrived far too quickly, and not quickly enough. Clara spent the afternoon in a state of nervous energy, cleaning the already clean cabin, checking and rechecking the blue dress, trying and failing to eat lunch. Mrs. Patterson came by at 5 to help her get ready, bringing pins for her hair and a small bottle of rose water. "My mother gave this to me on my wedding day," Mrs. Patterson said, dabbing a bit on Clara's wrists. "Seems fitting you should wear it tonight." "This isn't a wedding," Clara protested, but her voice was soft. "No, but it's a beginning, and beginnings deserve ceremony." Mrs. Patterson began working on Clara's hair, pinning it up in a style more elegant than Clara's usual severe bun. "You know people are going to stare tonight." "I know. And some of them are going to say unkind things." "I know that too. But some of them," Mrs. Patterson continued, meeting Clara's eyes in the mirror, "are going to see you differently, are going to start questioning their own assumptions. Change doesn't happen all at once, honey. It happens in moments like this, when someone brave enough stands up and says, 'I deserve respect.' You ready to be that someone?" Clara looked at her reflection, hair elegantly styled, face clean and hopeful, wearing a dress that actually fit and flattered. She looked like a woman going to a social with a gentleman caller. She looked normal, respectable even. She looked like she belonged. "I'm ready," Clara said, and realized she meant it. When Reed knocked on the door at 6:30, Clara's heart nearly leaped out of her chest. She opened it to find him standing there in clean clothes, his hair neatly combed, his boots polished. He looked handsome and solid and real, and the expression on his face when he saw her made Clara's breath catch. "Clara," he said softly. "You look—" "The dress is from Mrs. Patterson," Clara said quickly, suddenly self-conscious. "The dress is lovely. But I was going to say you look radiant." Reed offered his arm. "Ready?" Clara glanced back at Eli, who was bouncing excitedly by the table. Mrs. Patterson had agreed to watch him for the evening. "Be good for Mrs. Patterson, sweet boy." "I will. Have fun, Mama. You too, Mr. Reed." Clara took Reed's arm, feeling the solid strength of it under her hand. Together, they stepped out into the warm summer evening. The walk to the church hall took only 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Clara was hyper-aware of everything. The way people stopped their conversations to stare, the curtains twitching in windows as they passed, the whispers that followed in their wake. "You're doing fine," Reed murmured, his free hand covering hers where it rested on his arm. "Just keep breathing." "I feel like I might faint." "You won't. You're stronger than you think." Reed smiled down at her. "Besides, I've got you. If you stumble, I'll catch you." It was such a simple statement, but it steadied Clara. She wasn't doing this alone. Reed was right there beside her, solid and unshakable. They could hear the music before they reached the church hall, fiddles and piano, lively and welcoming. Light spilled from the windows and laughter floated on the evening air. It sounded like joy, like celebration, like everything Clara had watched from a distance for so long. At the entrance, Reed paused and looked at her seriously. "Last chance to change your mind. No judgment if you want to turn back." Clara looked at the door, at the warm light beyond it, at the life she could have if she was brave enough to claim it. She thought about Eli, watching other children play, about Miss Winters finding her courage, about Reed standing up to Mrs. Henderson without flinching, about the girl she'd been at 17 and the woman she could become at 23. "No," Clara said firmly. "We're going in." Reed's smile was brilliant. "That's my girl." He opened the door and they stepped inside together. The hall fell silent so abruptly it was like someone had cut the strings on all the instruments at once. Every head turned toward the entrance. Every eye fixed on Clara and Reed standing there together, her hand on his arm, both of them holding their heads high. Clara felt her face flush hot under the scrutiny. She wanted to run, wanted to hide, wanted to disappear. But Reed's arm was solid under her hand, and his voice was steady as he addressed the room. "Evening, everyone. Hope we're not too late to join the festivities." For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Morrison, the ranch owner whose barn Reed had helped save, stepped forward with a broad smile. "Callahan, about time you got here. I've been telling everyone about that night at the barn." He turned to Clara, tipping his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Mayfield, it's good to see you. That's a lovely dress." Thank you, Mr. Morrison, Clara managed, her voice barely audible. Morrison's public acknowledgement broke the spell. Conversations resumed, though at a lower volume. People went back to their food and dancing, though Clara could feel the weight of watching eyes. Mrs. Thornton appeared, looking flustered but not unkind. Mr. Callahan, Mrs. Mayfield, there's punch and refreshments at the far table. Much obliged, ma'am, Reed said, guiding Clara into the room. They made their way across the hall, and Clara felt like she was walking through a gauntlet. Some people nodded politely. Others deliberately looked away. A few whispered behind their hands, not even bothering to hide their gossip. But they were inside. Clara was at the social, in the blue dress, on Reed Callahan's arm. She'd done it. They reached the refreshment table, and Reed poured them both punch. Clara's hands were shaking so badly she nearly spilled hers. You're doing beautifully, Reed said quietly, standing close enough that his words were for her alone. Half the battle's already won just by walking through that door. I feel like everyone's staring. They are. Let them look. Let them see you're not ashamed, that you have nothing to be ashamed of. Before Clara could respond, a familiar voice spoke from behind them. Well, this is certainly bold. Clara turned to find Mrs. Henderson standing there, her expression sour, her dress dripping with expensive lace and obvious disapproval. Mrs. Henderson, Reed said evenly, enjoying the social. I was, before it was spoiled by inappropriate company. The woman's eyes raked over Clara with obvious disdain. I'm surprised the organizing committee allowed this. The social is open to all townspeople, Reed said calmly. Last I checked, Clara lives in Red Hollow, pays her way, contributes to the community. That makes her as welcome as anyone else. Contributes to the community? Mrs. Henderson laughed sharply. Is that what we're calling it now? She's a... Careful, Reed interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. Choose your next words very carefully, Mrs. Henderson. The woman's face reddened with anger and something else, maybe fear of the line she was about to cross. Around them, conversations had stopped again. People were watching, waiting to see what would happen. Into the tense silence, a new voice spoke up. Reed's right, Miss Winters said, stepping forward from the crowd. Mrs. Mayfield has every right to be here. And frankly, I'm glad she came. Mrs. Henderson whirled on the teacher. Miss Winters, surely you of all people understand the importance of standards. I understand the importance of kindness, Miss Winters interrupted firmly, and I'm tired of watching standards be used as an excuse for cruelty. A murmur ran through the crowd. Mrs. Patterson appeared at Clara's other side, her presence a silent show of support. Then, to Clara's surprise, Mr. Chen from the general store stepped forward. Mrs. Mayfield is a good customer, he said in his accented English. Always honest, always hardworking. This is enough for me. It was like watching a dam crack. One person after another stepped forward or spoke up. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough. Enough to show that the town's opinion wasn't as unified as Mrs. Henderson thought. Enough to prove that Reed's quiet campaign of respect had been taking root. Mrs. Henderson looked around at the shifting crowd, her expression furious and frightened. She'd built her power on enforcing social rules, on being the arbiter of who belonged and who didn't, and now that power was crumbling. This is outrageous, she sputtered. Absolutely outrageous. Come along, Gerald. We're leaving. She swept toward the door, her husband trailing behind her, looking relieved to escape. A few other families followed, but far fewer than Clara would have expected. The hall was quieter with them gone, but not empty. Not even close. Most people had stayed, and as the shock of the confrontation faded, the music started up again. Reed turned to Clara, bowing formally. May I have this dance? Clara's heart was still racing from the confrontation, her hands still shaking. She couldn't dance, not here, not in front of everyone who remained. It was too much. But then she looked at Reed's face, at the quiet pride and affection there. She thought about Eli, who'd said she deserved to go to parties, about Miss Winters finding her courage, about all the people who just stood up for her when they didn't have to, about choosing possibility over certainty. Yes, Clara whispered. Yes, you may. Reed led her onto the floor just as the music shifted to a waltz. He placed one hand at her waist, took her hand in his, and began to lead her through the steps. Clara followed clumsily at first, terrified of making a mistake, but Reed was patient and steady. "Just follow my lead," he murmured. "You're doing fine." Around them, other couples joined the dance. Life was returning to normal, or at least to a new normal where Clara Mayfield danced at the town social on Reed Callahan's arm. As they turned across the floor, Clara caught sight of their reflection in the hall's large windows. They looked like any other couple, happy, together, belonging. For the first time in 6 years, Clara saw herself as part of the town rather than separate from it. And she realized something profound. She'd been so busy believing other people's judgments of her that she'd never questioned whether those judgments were true. She'd accepted that she was ruined, that she didn't deserve respect, that she should be grateful for whatever scraps of tolerance people offered. But Reed had seen her differently from the start, and his unwavering belief in her worth had started to change not just how others saw her, but how she saw herself. "Thank you," she said softly as they danced. "For what?" "For seeing me. For standing beside me. For making me believe I deserve this." Reed's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Clara, you've always deserved this. Always. I didn't make you worthy of respect. I just refused to participate in the lie that you weren't." The music swelled, and they turned together across the floor, and Clara felt something inside her finally, fully break free. The shame she'd carried for 6 years. The belief that she was fundamentally less than. The certainty that she'd never belong. All of it crumbled away, leaving something new and fragile in its place. Hope. When the dance ended, Reed didn't immediately release her. He stood there on the floor, looking down at her with an expression that made Clara's breath catch. "Clara," he said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you." But before he could continue, Morrison appeared beside them, clapping Reed on the shoulder. "Callahan, got a moment? Want to introduce you to some of the other ranchers. They're interested in hearing about that new irrigation technique you mentioned." Reed looked torn, clearly wanting to finish what he'd started to say to Clara. But this was an opportunity for him, she realized. A chance to make connections, to build his reputation in a positive way after all the controversy of associating with her. "Go," Clara said, squeezing his hand. "I'll be fine." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Reed let Morrison lead him away, but he looked back at Clara with such longing that her heart skipped. What had he been about to say? Clara made her way to the edge of the room, accepting a glass of punch from Miss Winters and trying to process everything that had just happened. She'd walked into the social. She'd faced down Mrs. Henderson. She'd danced in front of everyone. She'd done the impossible, and the world hadn't ended. "You were very brave tonight," Miss Winters said quietly. "I hope you know that." "I couldn't have done it without Reed," Clara admitted. "Maybe not, but you're the one who accepted his invitation. You're the one who walked through that door. You're the one who held your head high." The teacher smiled. "Give yourself credit, Mrs. Mayfield. You earned it." As the evening wore on, Clara found herself in actual conversations with people who'd ignored her for years. Some were awkward, clearly unsure how to interact with her now that the unspoken rules had changed. But some were surprisingly warm. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't universal acceptance. But it was a start, and that was more than Clara had ever dared hope for. Near the end of the social, Reed found her again, his expression serious. "Can we talk? Outside, maybe?" "There's something I need to say." Clara's heart started racing again, but this time with anticipation rather than fear. "Of course." They slipped out into the warm night, away from the music and the crowd. The moon was bright overhead, painting everything in silver light. Reed took both her hands in his expression earnest and slightly nervous, the first time Clara had ever seen him uncertain. "Tonight went better than I hoped," he said. "But that's not what I want to talk about." "What is it?" Reed took a breath. "I've been thinking about the future, about what I want my life to look like. And Clara, every time I try to imagine it, you're there. You and Eli both." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear over the sound of her own pulse. "I know this is fast," Reed continued. "I know we've only known each other a few months. But I also know what I feel, and I know what I want." He squeezed her hands gently. I want a life with you, Clara. A real life. Not just reading lessons and walks home. I want to build something permanent, something lasting. Reed, let me finish, he said softly. I've been saving money for years, planning to buy land, start my own small ranch. Nothing fancy, but mine. A place where I could build a future. He paused. I want that future to include you, as my wife, and Eli as my son, if you'll both have me. Clara stared at him, hardly able to process what she was hearing. Marriage. He was talking about marriage, about claiming her and Eli not just for a dance or a social, but for a lifetime. But the talk, she whispered, the judgment. It won't stop just because we marry. It might get worse. I don't care about the talk. I care about you, about building a life that matters, with people who matter. Reed's voice was fierce with conviction. Clara, I'm not asking you to be perfect or to have a spotless past. I'm asking you to build a future with me, to let me stand beside you, not for a night, but for all the nights to come. Tears streamed down Clara's face. Why me? Why would you choose this? Choose us, when you could have anyone without complications? Because you're not a complication. You're a woman of courage and strength and love. Because Eli's a wonderful boy who deserves a father who will choose him every day. Because when I look at you, I don't see shame or scandal. I see home. The word hit Clara like a physical blow. Home. She'd been searching for that feeling for 6 years, believing it was forever lost to her. And here was Reed offering it freely, asking nothing but that she be brave enough to accept. I'm scared, she admitted. I know, but Clara, you just walked into that social and faced down your fears in front of the whole town. You just danced with me while people watched and judged and whispered. You've already proven you're brave enough for this. Reed's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. I'm not asking you to decide tonight. Think about it. Take all the time you need. But know that I'm serious. I want to marry you, Clara Mayfield. I want to build a life with you. Clara looked at this man who'd walked into her life and refused to walk away. This man who saw her worth when she'd forgotten she had any. This man who was offering her not just respectability or security, but genuine love and partnership. And she realized her answer had been forming since the first reading lesson, since the fire, since the moment he'd held her while she cried. Maybe even since that first day at the parade when he'd seen her hiding and looked at her with concern instead of judgment. Reed, she said, her voice shaking but sure. I don't need time to think about it. My answer is yes. His expression transformed from hope to joy so pure it took her breath away. Yes? Yes. I'll marry you. We'll marry you. Eli and I both. Clara laughed through her tears. If you're sure. If you really want this. Reed pulled her into his arms, holding her close. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. They stood there in the moonlight, holding each other, and Clara felt the last of her defenses finally crumble. She was going to marry Reed Callahan. She was going to have a home, a family, a future. She was going to stop hiding and start living. Eli's going to be so happy, she whispered against Reed's chest. So am I. Reed pulled back just enough to look at her face. Clara, I promise you, I'm going to spend every day proving you made the right choice. I'm going to be the husband and father you both deserve. You already are, Clara said simply. Reed smiled, and then slowly, carefully, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Clara felt her whole world shift on its axis. This was what it was supposed to feel like. This was what love looked like when it was real. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Reed rested his forehead against hers. We should probably go back inside before people start more rumors, he said with a soft laugh. Let them talk, Clara said, surprising herself with her boldness. I don't care anymore. I'm happy, Reed. For the first time in 6 years, I'm genuinely happy. They can't take that away from me. No, Reed agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. They can't. They walked back into the social hand in hand, and if people noticed Clara's tear-stained face and radiant smile, if they saw the way Reed looked at her like she hung the stars, well, That would just give them something new to talk about. And for once, Clara didn't mind at all. The news of their engagement spread through Red Hollow faster than the morning sun could burn off the dew. By the time Clara walked Eli to Mrs. Patterson's house the next morning, half the town already knew that Reed Callahan had proposed to the Mayfield woman, and she'd accepted. The reactions were as divided as Clara had expected. Some people were genuinely happy for them. Others were scandalized. A few seemed simply resigned, as if they'd seen this coming from the moment Reed started teaching Eli his letters. But what surprised Clara most was how little the negative reactions bothered her anymore. She'd spent 6 years letting other people's opinions dictate her worth, her choices, her entire existence. But standing in Reed's arms last night, accepting his proposal, she'd felt something shift permanently inside her. She'd stopped needing their approval. "Mama, why are you smiling so much?" Eli asked as they walked, his small hand tucked in hers. "Because I have something wonderful to tell you, sweet boy." Clara knelt down to his level, taking both his hands. "You know how Mr. Reed has been teaching you letters and being so kind to us?" Eli nodded enthusiastically. "He's my favorite person, except you." Clara's heart swelled. "Well, last night Mr. Reed asked me a very important question. He asked if we would like to be his family. Really, truly, his family. Forever." Eli's eyes went wide. "You mean he wants to be my papa?" "Yes, honey. If you want him to be. He wants to marry me and help me raise you and give us a home together, but only if you want that too." For a moment, Eli just stared at her, processing this information. Then his face broke into the most brilliant smile Clara had ever seen, and he threw his arms around her neck so hard he nearly knocked her over. "Yes, yes, I want Mr. Reed to be my papa. Can I call him Papa? When can we tell him? Is it real? Are we really going to be a family?" Clara laughed, tears streaming down her face as she held her son close. "Yes, sweet boy, it's real. We're really going to be a family. Will we live in a real house? With Mr. Reed? Will I still get to learn my letters?" "You'll learn more than letters. You'll learn everything a boy needs to know. And yes, we'll have a real house. Mr. Reed is going to build us one on his own land." Eli pulled back, his expression suddenly serious. "Mama, does this mean the other kids won't be mean to me anymore? Because I'll have a papa like they do?" The question broke Clara's heart even as it filled her with hope. Her son had internalized the rejection so deeply, had understood on some level that his lack of a father made him different, lesser, in the eyes of Red Hollow. "Some people might still be unkind," Clara said honestly. "But it won't matter as much because you'll have a papa who loves you and chooses you every single day, and that's worth more than all the approval in the world." "I already love Mr. Reed," Eli said simply. "I've loved him since he showed me how to make the letter A." When they reached Mrs. Patterson's house, the older woman took one look at Clara's face and broke into a knowing smile. "He asked you, didn't he? And you said yes. How did you know?" "Honey, I've been watching that man look at you for weeks. It was only a matter of time." Mrs. Patterson pulled Clara into a warm hug. "I'm so happy for you. Reed Callahan is a good man, and you deserve a good man." "The town is going to talk," Clara said, but there was no fear in her voice now, just acceptance. "Let them talk. They'll talk themselves hoarse, and then they'll move on to the next thing. That's what small towns do." Mrs. Patterson held Clara at arm's length, studying her face. "You look different this morning. Lighter, somehow." "I feel different," Clara admitted. "I feel like I've been carrying a weight for so long I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. And now it's gone." "That's what love does, honey. Real love. It doesn't add burdens, it helps carry them." Clara spent the morning doing her usual work, but everything felt different. The houses she cleaned seemed brighter. The clothes she washed seemed lighter. Even the whispers she overheard at the general store couldn't dampen her spirits. She was going to marry Reed Callahan. She was going to have a home. Eli was going to have a father. Everything was changing, and for once the change felt like hope instead of loss. That afternoon, Reed found her at Mrs. Thornton's where she was tending the garden. He looked slightly nervous, which was so unlike him that Clara immediately worried something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her trowel. Nothing's wrong. I told Eli this morning, didn't you? About us? I did. He's thrilled. Wants to call you Papa already. Reed's expression softened with such emotion that Clara's throat tightened. I was hoping he'd feel that way. But Clara, I want to do this right. I want to ask him properly. Would that be all right? Ask him what? For permission to marry you and to be his father. Reed ran a hand through his hair, clearly working up courage. I know he's only 5, but this affects him as much as it affects you and me. He should have a say. Clara felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. Here was another example of why Reed was different from Charles, from any man she'd known. He saw Eli not as an unfortunate complication, but as a person whose feelings mattered. He'll love that, she managed. When do you want to talk to him? Tonight, after supper? I thought maybe I could bring something, a gift of some kind. What is he like? Reed, you don't have to bring gifts. He already loves you. I know, but I want to mark the moment. Make it special for him. Reed's smile was slightly sheepish. I've been thinking about this for days, Clara, planning it out. I want Eli to always remember that I chose him deliberately, that I wanted to be his father. So that evening, after Clara finished her work and collected Eli from Mrs. Patterson's, they walked to the church steps where Reed was waiting. He had a package wrapped in brown paper, and his expression was a mixture of excitement and nervousness that made him look younger somehow. Mr. Reed! Eli ran ahead, launching himself at Reed with absolute trust that he'd be caught. Reed scooped him up easily, swinging him around before setting him down. Hello, Eli. I was hoping we could talk about something important. Man to man. Eli's eyes went wide. Really? Man to man. Really? Reed knelt down so they were eye to eye. Your mama probably told you that I asked her to marry me last night. Eli nodded solemnly. She said you want to be my papa. I do, very much. But I wanted to ask you directly if that would be all right with you, because this is your life too, and your feelings matter. Reed paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. Eli, I would be honored to be your father, to teach you things and help you grow and be there for you always, but only if you want me to be. I want it more than anything, Eli said, his voice high with excitement. I've wanted a papa my whole life, and I want it to be you. Reed pulled the boy into a tight hug, and Clara saw his shoulders shake slightly. When he pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. I'm glad, son, because I've wanted a boy like you my whole life, too. Reed picked up the wrapped package. I brought you something to mark this day, so you'll always remember the day we became a family. Eli tore into the paper with the enthusiasm only a 5-year-old could muster. Inside was a book, a real proper book with a leather cover and gilded pages. It's a collection of stories, Reed explained. Some of them I read when I was your age. I thought maybe we could read them together, and someday when you're older you can read them to your own children. Eli ran his fingers over the cover reverently. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Not as beautiful as you're going to feel when you can read every word in it by yourself. Reed ruffled his hair. We'll work on it together, father and son. Eli looked up at him with absolute adoration. Can I call you Papa now, or do I have to wait until you marry Mama? You can call me Papa right now if you want to. Papa? Eli tested the word, then said it again with more confidence. Papa? My Papa? Clara watched them together, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what family was supposed to look like. This was what love looked like when it was freely given, with no conditions or expectations. This was everything she'd thought she'd lost forever at 17. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Reed wanted to marry quickly. No point waiting when we're sure, he said, but Clara worried about appearances, about doing things properly. It was Miss Winters who helped her see reason. You've spent 6 years worrying about appearances and propriety, the teacher said gently, as she helped Clara sort through fabric samples for a wedding dress. Maybe it's time to worry about happiness instead. They set the date for 3 weeks away, which gave Clara just enough time to finish her existing work commitments and for Reed to make the necessary arrangements. He'd already put money down on a piece of land west of town, near the Morrison Ranch where he worked. It wasn't much, just 20 acres, but it was theirs, and Reed had plans to build a small house and start a modest cattle operation. Nothing fancy, he told Clara as they walked the property one Sunday afternoon, Eli running ahead to explore. But it'll be ours, built with our own hands. Clara looked at the empty land, trying to imagine a house there, a life there, a future there. I don't need fancy, she said softly. I just need home. Then that's what I'll build you, a home. The wedding preparations brought unexpected allies. Mrs. Patterson, of course, was a constant help, but so was Mrs. Thornton, who offered her parlor for the ceremony. Mr. Chen donated fabric for Clara's dress at cost. Morrison gave Reed time off to prepare the land and promised to help with the house raising. Even more surprising was the day Miss Winters appeared at Clara's cabin with news. I presented Eli's case to the school board, she said, her eyes bright with triumph. It took some convincing, and I may have threatened to quit if they didn't approve, but they finally agreed. Eli can start school in the fall term. Clara's knees went weak. Truly? They said yes? They said yes. He'll be in my classroom, learning alongside the other children. Miss Winters smiled. Your son is going to get the education he deserves, Mrs. Mayfield. Or should I say, soon to be Mrs. Callahan. Clara hugged the teacher tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude. Everything was falling into place. Everything she'd thought was impossible was becoming real. But not everyone was happy about the changes. Mrs. Henderson made her displeasure known at every opportunity, loudly declaring that Red Hollow's standards were declining and that she might have to move to a more respectable town. A few families sided with her, refusing to attend the wedding or acknowledge the engagement. Clara would be lying if she said it didn't hurt, but the hurt was manageable now, dulled by the overwhelming support from unexpected quarters. And Reed never wavered, not once. He held his head high, treated Clara with obvious affection in public, and made it clear to anyone who'd listen that he was proud to be marrying her. Let them judge, he said one evening when Clara worried aloud about the remaining opposition. Their judgment says more about them than it does about us. The night before the wedding, Clara sat in her cabin with Eli, packing up their few belongings for the move to Reed's land. The house wasn't finished yet. They'd be staying with the Morrisons temporarily while Reed completed the construction, but it felt symbolic somehow, closing this chapter of their lives. Mama, are you scared? Eli asked, watching her fold clothes into a trunk. A little, Clara admitted. Change is always a bit frightening, even when it's good change. I'm not scared. Papa says we're going to have chickens and maybe a cow, and he's going to teach me to ride a horse. Clara smiled at how easily Papa had become Eli's name for Reed, as if Reed had always been his father, as if they'd always been a family. He'll teach you lots of things, sweet boy, and you'll learn to read in real school with the other children. Your whole life is opening up. Is your life opening up too, Mama? The question surprised her with its perceptiveness. Yes, honey, it is, for both of us. Good. You deserve to be happy. You've been sad for so long. Clara pulled her son into her arms, marveling at his insight. I haven't been sad, sweet boy. Not when I had you. You were sad sometimes, when you thought I wasn't looking. But you're not sad anymore. Eli pulled back to look at her seriously. Papa makes you smile for real, the kind of smile that goes all the way to your eyes. Out of the mouths of babes, Clara thought for the 100th time. Her son had seen what she'd been trying to hide, had understood on some level that she'd been merely surviving rather than living. But that was changing tomorrow. Tomorrow, she would marry Reed Callahan and start a new life, a real life. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, with a soft breeze that seemed to carry promise on the air. Clara dressed carefully in the gown Mrs. Patterson had helped her make. Simple white cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Not fancy, but clean and pretty and appropriate. Mrs. Patterson helped with her hair, pinning it up with small wildflowers Eli had picked that morning. You look beautiful, honey, the older woman said, stepping back to admire her work. Like a bride should look. Happy. Clara looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't the frightened 17-year-old who'd believed Charles Whitmore's lies. This wasn't the broken woman who'd arrived in Red Hollow 6 years ago, desperate and alone. This was someone new, someone who'd survived everything life had thrown at her and come out stronger. This was Clara Mayfield on her wedding day, about to become Clara Callahan, and she was radiant. The ceremony was small, held in Mrs. Thornton's parlor with about 20 people in attendance. Not the whole town, but the people who mattered, Morrison and his wife, Mrs. Patterson, Miss Winters, Mr. Chen, a handful of others who'd shown kindness over the weeks of the engagement. And standing at the front of the room, wearing his best clothes and looking at Clara like she hung the moon, was Reed. Eli walked Clara down the makeshift aisle, his small hand in hers, his face glowing with pride. When they reached Reed, he looked down at the boys seriously. "I'm about to marry your mama, son. That makes us a family. You and me and her. Are you ready for that?" "I've been ready my whole life, Papa," Eli said solemnly. Reed pulled him into a quick hug, then took Clara's hand as Eli went to stand with Mrs. Patterson. The minister, brought in from a neighboring town since Red Hollow's reverend had declined to perform the ceremony, spoke about love and commitment and new beginnings. But Clara barely heard the words. She was too focused on Reed's face, on the way he looked at her with such unwavering devotion. When it came time for the vows, Reed spoke first, his voice clear and strong. "Clara, I promise to stand beside you in all things, to be a partner, not just a husband, to honor your strength and support you in your struggles, to be a father to Eli, not by obligation, but by choice, to build a home with you, a life with you, a future with you. I choose you today and every day forward, freely and completely." Clara's turn came, and she spoke through tears of joy. "Reed, I promise to trust you with my heart, even though trust has been hard for me, to build a life with you based on honesty and respect, to stand beside you as you've stood beside me, to honor the gift you've given Eli in becoming his father. I choose you today, choosing courage over fear, hope over despair, love over loneliness." When the minister pronounced them married and invited Reed to kiss his bride, Reed cupped Clara's face gently in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that Clara felt her last defenses finally, completely crumble. She was his now, and he was hers, and they were a family. The small reception that followed was filled with genuine warmth and celebration. People who'd once crossed the street to avoid Clara now congratulated her sincerely. Morrison gave a toast about how Reed was the finest man he knew, and Clara was lucky to have him, then corrected himself to say Reed was the lucky one, earning laughs all around. Eli stayed close to Reed the entire time, clearly afraid this might all be a dream that would disappear if he let his new father out of his sight. As the afternoon wore on and the guests began to leave, Clara found herself standing on Mrs. Thornton's porch with Reed, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "We did it," she said softly. "We're married." "We're married," Reed agreed, pulling her close. "Mrs. Callahan, that's going to take some getting used to. Take all the time you need. We've got the rest of our lives." The rest of their lives. Clara let the phrase settle over her like a warm blanket. She had a future now. She had a family. She had a home, even if it was still being built. She had everything she'd thought was forever lost. The transition to married life wasn't without challenges. Living temporarily with the Morrisons while their house was completed meant limited privacy and constant awareness of being guests. Reed worked long days on the ranch and even longer evenings on their land, determined to get the house finished before winter. Claire continued some of her cleaning jobs, wanting to contribute financially and maintain her hard-won independence. But now she worked as Mrs. Callahan, Reed's wife, and the difference in how people treated her was stark. Doors that had been closed opened. Conversations that would have excluded her now included her. She was invited to join the ladies' auxiliary, though she declined, not quite ready to sit in a room with Mrs. Henderson. Eli thrived under the changes. Reed spent every free moment with him, teaching him to care for horses, showing him how to mend fences, explaining the workings of the ranch. And in the evenings, they'd sit together with the storybook Reed had given him, sounding out words slowly but surely. "He's going to be reading full sentences before school starts," Miss Winters said one afternoon when she stopped by to check on Eli's progress. "Reed's been an excellent teacher." "Reed's been excellent at everything," Clara said, and meant it. But it was the moments alone with Reed, rare as they were, that Clara treasured most. Late at night, lying beside him in the small room the Morrisons had provided, talking in whispers about their plans and dreams. "I want to add a porch to the house," Reed said one night. "Somewhere you can sit in the evenings and watch the sunset." "I want chickens," Clara admitted, "and a vegetable garden. I want to grow things, not just survive." "We'll have all of that. We'll build it together." And they did. As summer faded into fall, their house took shape. It wasn't large, just 3 rooms and a loft, but it was solid and well built, with the promised porch and space for Clara's garden. The day they moved in was chaotic and wonderful. Morrison and several other ranchers helped transport their belongings, which didn't amount to much, but felt significant anyway. Mrs. Patterson brought curtains she'd sewn. Miss Winters contributed books for Eli's education. Even Mr. Chen appeared with a set of dishes, refusing payment. "For the new family," he said in his careful English. "May your house be filled with happiness." That night, their first in their own home, Clara stood on the porch with Reed, while Eli explored his new loft bedroom upstairs. The sun was setting over the land they now owned, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "What are you thinking?" Reed asked, his arm around her waist. "I'm thinking about the girl I was at 17, how she believed in fairy tales and happy endings, how life taught her those things weren't real." Clara leaned into Reed's warmth. "And I'm thinking how wrong she was. Happy endings are real. They just don't look like the stories said they would." No. They're better. They're real people choosing each other every day. Their hard work and challenges faced together. They're building something from nothing and calling it home. Clara turned to look at Reed. "They're you." Reed kissed her softly, sweetly, and Clara marveled at how natural it felt now, how right. She'd been so afraid of trust, of love, of letting anyone close. But Reed had shown her that not all men were like Charles, that some promises were kept, that some love was real. The sound of small feet on the stairs interrupted them. Eli appeared in the doorway, his face glowing with excitement. "Mama! Papa! Come see! I can see all the way to the Morrison Ranch from my window, and there are stars starting to come out. Can we count them together?" Reed and Clara exchanged amused glances. "Of course, son," Reed said. "Let's go count stars." They climbed up to the loft, all 3 of them squeezed together by the small window, pointing out constellations and making up stories about the shapes they formed. Eli's laughter filled the new house, making it feel like home in a way no furniture or decorations ever could. Later, after Eli finally fell asleep, exhausted from the excitement of moving day, Clara and Reed sat on their porch in the gathering darkness. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked quietly. "Taking on a ready-made family? Dealing with all the judgment and gossip?" "Not for a single second." Reed's answer was immediate and firm. "Clara, you and Eli are the best things that ever happened to me. You gave me purpose. You gave me family. You gave me home. Why would I regret that?" "Some men would. Some men would have walked away the moment things got difficult. I'm not some men. I'm your husband, Eli's father, and I chose both of those roles with my eyes wide open." Reed turned to face her. "Stop waiting for me to leave, Clara. I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me for life." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks, happy tears this time. "Promise?" "I promise. Every day for the rest of our lives, I'll choose you. I'll choose us. That's what love is. Not a feeling that comes and goes, but a choice you make again and again." They sat together in the darkness, holding hands, listening to the sounds of their land settling around them. Somewhere an owl hooted. The wind rustled through the grass. Inside, their son slept peacefully in his own room, in his own house, with 2 parents who loved him. This was home. This was family. This was the life Clara had stopped believing she could have. And it was more beautiful than any fairy tale. As autumn progressed, life settled into comfortable rhythms. Eli started school and flourished under Miss Winter's teaching, making friends and learning with the enthusiasm Reed had nurtured in him. Clara's garden produced more vegetables than they could use, so she started trading the excess with neighbors, building connections and goodwill. Reed's work on the Morrison Ranch continued, but he also began building their own small herd of cattle with Morrison's help and advice. It was slow going, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. The town's attitude toward them continued to evolve. Mrs. Henderson and her closest allies maintained their disapproval, but they were increasingly isolated in their judgment. Most of Red Hollow had moved on, accepting the Callahan family as part of the community. One afternoon in late October, Clara was in town buying supplies when she overheard a conversation between two women she didn't know well. "Did you see little Eli Callahan at school yesterday? Sharp as a tack, Miss Winters says. Reed's done well by that boy, and Clara too. They seem happy. Makes you think, doesn't it, about how quick we are to judge sometimes." Clara didn't announce her presence, just quietly finished her shopping and left. But the conversation stayed with her, a reminder of how far they'd come. That evening, she told Reed about it while they prepared supper together, something Clara still marveled at, having a partner who helped with domestic tasks without being asked. "People are changing their minds about us," she said, peeling potatoes. "Slowly, but it's happening. Some people were never against us in the first place," Reed pointed out. "They just needed permission to show it. We gave them that permission by refusing to be ashamed." "You gave them that permission. I was ready to hide forever." "No, you weren't. You were just scared. There's a difference." Reed stopped his work to look at her seriously. "Clara, you're one of the bravest people I know. You survived things that would have destroyed lesser people. You raised an incredible son alone. You faced down the whole town at that social. Don't sell yourself short. I couldn't have done any of that without you." "Maybe, but I couldn't have built this life without you either. We're partners, Clara. We make each other stronger." The winter that followed was harsh, with heavy snows and bitter cold. But the Callahan house stood firm, and the family inside stayed warm and together. Reed taught Eli to carve wood by the fire. Clara learned to bake bread in their new stove. They read together, talked together, dreamed together. And slowly, imperceptibly, Clara's last fears faded away. She stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, stopped expecting Reed to change his mind, stopped believing this happiness was temporary. This was her life now. This was real. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and bringing new life to the land. Clara planted an even bigger garden, determined to preserve enough food for the next winter. Eli finished his first year of school with top marks, earning praise from Miss Winters and pride from his parents. And Reed surprised Clara one evening in May by presenting her with a carefully wrapped package. "What's this?" she asked, turning it over in her hands. "Open it and see." Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal, blank and waiting to be filled. "I thought you might want to write your story," Reed said softly. "Our story. So Eli and his children and their children will know where they came from. Will know what you survived. Will understand that happy endings are possible even after the hardest beginnings." Clara ran her fingers over the smooth leather, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I wouldn't know where to start." "Start with the truth. Start with the day you arrived in Red Hollow alone and scared. Or start with the parade, with a woman hiding behind a barrel. Or start with now, with a family on their own land building a future together." Reed smiled. "Your story is worth telling, Clara. All of it. The hard parts and the beautiful parts, the shame and the redemption, the loneliness and the love." That night, after everyone else was asleep, Clara opened the journal and began to write. She wrote about Charles Whitmore and his lies, about her parents' rejection, about arriving in Red Hollow pregnant and terrified. She wrote about the years of hiding, of working herself to exhaustion, of watching life happen to everyone else while she survived in the margins. And then she wrote about a cowboy who'd seen her behind a barrel at a parade and looked at her with concern instead of judgment, about reading lessons and barn fires and a dance at a social, about choosing courage over fear, hope over despair, love over loneliness. She wrote about building a home, not just with wood and nails, but with trust and patience and daily choices to show up for each other. She wrote her truth, their truth, and it was beautiful. 5 years later, Clara stood on that same porch, watching the sunset paint the sky while Eli, now 10, helped Reed repair a fence in the near pasture. The garden was lush with summer growth. Their herd had grown to 20 head of cattle. The house had gained an addition to accommodate the baby girl sleeping peacefully inside. Little Margaret Callahan, born the previous winter with Reed's gray eyes and Clara's dark hair. A daughter who would grow up never knowing shame, never doubting her worth, never having to hide. Mrs. Patterson had passed away the year before, but not before holding baby Margaret and telling Clara how proud she was of the life they'd built. Miss Winters had married and moved to a larger town, but she still wrote letters asking about Eli's progress. Even Mrs. Henderson had softened somewhat, at least to the point of polite nods when they passed on the street. Red Hollow had changed. Or maybe Clara had just stopped seeing it through the lens of her own shame. Either way, it felt like home now in a way it never had before. Reed looked up from his work and caught her watching. He said something to Eli, then started walking toward the house, his gait easy and familiar. When he reached the porch, he pulled Clara into his arms. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, the same question he'd asked 100 times over the years. "I'm thinking about that day at the parade. How I thought my life was already decided. How I believed no decent man would ever choose me." Clara looked up at him, this man who'd proven her so beautifully wrong. "I'm thinking about how wrong I was about everything." "Not everything. You were right about one thing." "What's that?" "That Eli needed to learn his letters." Reed grinned. "Look how well that turned out." Clara laughed and kissed him, right there on the porch in full view of anyone who might be watching. She didn't care anymore who saw, who judged, who talked. She'd learned that the opinions that mattered were the ones from people you loved and who loved you back. Everything else was just noise. Eli ran up to the porch, breathless and happy. "Mama, can I go to Tommy Henderson's house tomorrow? His ma said I could come over and we could fish in their pond." Tommy Henderson, Mrs. Henderson's son. The boy who'd once excluded Eli from games. Now they were friends, and Mrs. Henderson was extending invitations. Miracles did happen, Clara thought. "If you finish your chores first," she said, ruffling his hair. "I will. I promise." Eli darted inside to check on his baby sister, leaving Clara and Reed alone again. "He's happy," Reed observed. "Really, truly happy." "So am I." Clara leaned into Reed's embrace. "So are you, I hope." "More than I ever thought possible." Reed kissed the top of her head. "You know what the best part is?" "What?" "This is just the beginning. We have decades ahead of us. Decades of sunsets and harvests and watching our children grow. Decades of building this life together." Clara thought about the journal upstairs, now filled with years of their story. She'd need a second volume soon, she realized, because their story was still being written day by day, choice by choice. She'd thought her story ended the day Charles Whitmore abandoned her. Thought the best she could hope for was survival, existing on the margins of other people's lives. But she'd been wrong. That hadn't been the end of her story at all. It had been the beginning of learning her own strength, the beginning of understanding that worth wasn't determined by circumstances, but by character. The beginning of building something real and lasting with her own hands. And the real story, the one worth telling, had started the day a cowboy saw her hiding behind a barrel and looked at her like she mattered. The day Reed Callahan walked into her life and refused to walk away. The day Clara Mayfield stopped hiding and started living. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Clara held her husband close and looked out over the land they'd built a life on. Behind them, their children slept safely. Around them, their home stood strong. Ahead of them, a future full of possibilities stretched wide and welcoming. She'd thought no one would marry her with a child. Thought she was destined for loneliness and judgment. But a cowboy had asked her in front of them all, had chosen her publicly, proudly, completely. And in choosing her, he'd given her back herself. This was Clara's happy ending. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and earned and infinitely precious. This was home. This was family. This was love. And it was more than enough.